Reed Callahan had turned away strangers for 15 years until that frozen December dusk, when 5 Apache widows appeared at his fence line, their eyes hollow with hunger, their hands raw from rope burns. The tallest one, Sia, didn't beg. She simply said, "We have 3 days before they find us, maybe less." Reed's finger hovered over his rifle trigger as hoof prints in the snow behind them told a story his conscience couldn't ignore. One choice, one gate, one night that would burn his solitary world to ash. Stay with me through every twist of this 2-hour journey and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far across the map this story travels. The wind that December carried teeth. It scraped across the high country of Silver Butte, Colorado territory with the kind of cold that made a man's bones ache just thinking about stepping outside. Reed Callahan stood at his kitchen window, tin cup of coffee cooling in his weathered hands, watching the sun bleed out behind the western peaks. 15 years he'd lived in this cabin. 15 years of silence broken only by the creak of his rocking chair and the occasional bleat from his small herd of goats. He preferred it that way. The knock came just as darkness thickened, not on his door, but a sound like knuckles rapping on wood somewhere distant. Reed's head turned coffee forgotten. There it was again, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the direction of his front gate 100 yards down the slope. His hand found the rifle before conscious thought caught up. Visitors were rare. Visitors after dark were trouble. Reed pulled on his coat and stepped onto the porch boots, crunching through the inch of fresh snow that had fallen since noon. The cold bit through his collar as he descended the steps, rifle held low but ready. The moon was a sliver barely enough to see by, but his eyes had adjusted to mountain darkness years ago. 5 shapes stood at his gate. Human shapes, still as fence posts. Reed's finger found the trigger guard. Gates closed for a reason. "We know." The voice was female, steady, despite the tremor of cold underneath. "We're asking anyway." He moved closer just enough for moonlight to catch details. 5 women, all of them Apache, by the look of their clothing and the set of their features. The one who'd spoken stood slightly forward, middle-aged, with iron-gray streaks in her long black hair, and eyes that assessed him the way a general might assess terrain. Behind her 4 others, one tall enough to meet his own 6-foot frame, one with a bundle of fabric clutched to her chest, one lean and wary as a coyote, and one young, maybe 17, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "We don't want trouble," the leader said. Her English carried the precise cadence of someone who'd learned it deliberately carefully. "But we need shelter, 3 days, maybe less." "Before what?" Reed asked. "Before they find us." Reed's jaw tightened. He knew that they, without needing names. The territory was crawling with men who saw Apache women as fair-game bounty hunters, claim jumpers worse. He'd heard the stories in town, read the inflammatory broadsides the Gazette sometimes ran. Savages on the move. Unattached squaws pose risk to settlements. Propaganda and poison, most of it. But none of that meant he should open his gate. "I can't help you," Reed said, though the words tasted like ash. The tall one behind the leader shifted, and Reed saw the glint of something in her hand, not a weapon he realized, but a long piece of iron, maybe a pry bar. The one with the bundle pressed it tighter to her ribs. The youngest swayed slightly, her weight clearly painful on that walking stick. The leader, Sia, he'd later learn, her name didn't plead. She simply held his gaze. "You were in the translation corps at Fort Union, 1867 to 69. You brokered 3 treaty talks that saved lives on both sides. Your Chiricahua was better than most missionaries." Reed's blood went cold. "How do you—" "My cousin's husband was at the second talk. He remembered you. Said you were the only white man in the room who listened more than he spoke." She paused. "He died last spring. Cholera." The words hung in the frozen air. Reed's mind raced. If she knew his history, she'd done her research, or someone had done it for her. That meant desperation. That meant calculated risk. That meant she'd weighed him and decided he was worth the gamble. Behind them, up the slope where the tree line thickened, Reed caught movement. His eyes snapped to it. Two riders, maybe three silhouettes barely visible against the dark pines. Watching. Waiting. Sia followed his gaze. We lost them at the river crossing. They'll pick up the trail by morning. Reed's throat worked. 15 years of solitude. 15 years of quiet. 15 years of telling himself that the world's problems weren't his to solve anymore. But he'd been a translator once, a bridge builder, a man who understood that language spoken or silent mattered less than what you did when someone stood at your gate in the snow. His finger slipped off the trigger guard. "One condition," Reed said, voice rough. "You break my trust, you're gone. No second chances." Sia nodded once. Understood. Reed reached for the latch. The iron was so cold it burned his palm. He swung the gate open with a creak that sounded like a scream in the stillness. "Come on, then." They moved up the slope in silence, Reed leading with the rifle, the 5 women following in single file. The tall one, Polly, he'd learned, brought up the rear, her eyes scanning the tree line with the focus of someone who'd survived by staying alert. The youngest, Tala, struggled with each step, her breath coming in shallow gasps. At the cabin, Reed held the door wide. Inside, quickly, they filed through, bringing the smell of wood smoke and sweat and something medicinal, sage, maybe, or sweet grass. Reed barred the door and turned to find them standing in a tight cluster near his fireplace, not touching anything, not presuming space. Sia met his eyes. "We need rules." Reed blinked. "Rules. Yes, your house, your boundaries. We need to know them." It was so unexpected, so deliberate, that Reed found himself nodding before he'd fully processed the request. He set the rifle in the corner within reach, but not threatening, and gestured to the main room. "All right. Rules," he thought for a moment, trying to shake off the surreal feeling of hosting 5 strangers in a space he'd kept empty for so long. "That room there is mine." He pointed to the door off the kitchen. "I'll keep it closed. Yours is the back room, used to be storage, but there's floor space and I've got extra blankets. Door latches from the inside. You can bar it if you want." Kaya, the one with the bundle, spoke for the first time, her voice soft. "You won't enter without permission." "Not unless the cabin's on fire," Reed said. Something shifted in the air, an easing, subtle but real. Sia inclined her head. "Fair. Food's communal if you're hungry," Reed continued. "I've got cornmeal, beans, some dried venison. Not much else this time of year. Water's from the pump out back. Privy's 20 paces north of the porch. There's a lantern by the door. We can cook," Kaya offered, "if you have a pot." "I have a pot." Nolly, the lean one with the coyote eyes, stepped forward and examined the door latch with a critical squint. "This is loose. I can fix it." "Suit yourself," Reed said. Tala sank onto the bench by the fireplace with a barely suppressed whimper. Reed's gaze dropped to her foot, wrapped in cloth that was stained dark. Not blood, he realized. Infection. "You need that looked at," he said. Tala's eyes went wide and wary. Sia moved between them, protective. "We'll tend to her." "I'm not offering to touch her," Reed said, holding up both hands. "I mean supplies. I've got carbolic salve, clean bandages, whiskey for cleaning wounds. They're in the cupboard. You're welcome to them." Sia studied him, then nodded slowly. "We'll take them. Thank you." Reed fetched the supplies and set them on the table, then stepped back to give them space. Kaya moved immediately to Tala's side, unwrapping the foot with gentle efficiency. The youngest bit her lip to keep from crying out. As the fabric pulled away from the wound, a deep gash across the arch, swollen and leaking. "Barbed wire," Kaya murmured. 3 days old." Reed winced. 3 days running on that. No wonder the girl looked ready to collapse. While Kaya worked, Sia began pulling items from the small packs they carried: a few pieces of jerky, a handful of cornmeal wrapped in cloth, a tiny bottle of something that smelled sharp and clean. Not much, barely enough for one person, let alone 5. Reed moved to the stove and began heating water. "There's stew from yesterday, still good, I'll warm it." "You don't have to, I'm warming it for myself," Reed interrupted. "You're welcome to share." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Sia accepted it with a small nod. They ate in careful silence, bowls balanced on laps, each woman hyper-aware of the space she occupied. Reed sat in his rocking chair, the only sound the scrape of spoons and the pop of the fire. He watched them without staring, old translator habit, reading body language like text. Polly sat nearest the door, her long frame coiled like a spring eyes, flicking to the window every few seconds. Noli had already tightened the door latch and was now examining the window frame with the focus of someone cataloging weaknesses. Kaya finished her stew quickly and returned to Tala's foot, rewrapping it with Reed's clean bandages and a poultice that smelled of something green and bitter. Sia ate slowly, methodically, but her gaze never left the door. "They'll come at first light," Sia said, finally breaking the silence. "Maybe sooner if they're eager." "Who are they?" Reed asked. "Deputy Crow and his men. They call themselves lawmen, but the only law they follow is profit." Reed's fingers tightened on his bowl. "Bounty hunters. Worse, they carry warrants, fake ones we think, but signed and sealed enough to fool most sheriffs. They claim to be looking for dangerous, unattached native women. What they really do is raid camps, take food and supplies, burn shelters. Then they collect payment from somewhere downstream." "Downstream?" Sia's mouth thinned. "We don't know who, but someone's paying them, and someone's making sure the warrants look real." Reed set his bowl aside, mind-churning. Forged warrants. That was new. Bounty hunters, he understood, mercenaries had always existed, but fake legal documents that required resources, organization, someone with access to seals and signatures. "Why come here?" Reed asked. "Because you opened the gate once before," Sia said. "At Fort Union. You let people speak who weren't supposed to have voices. We're hoping you'll do it again." Reed's chest tightened. 15 years he'd run from that version of himself. The man who'd believed words could change the world, who'd sat across from chiefs and colonels and tried to parse meaning from the chasm between them. He'd left that life when the treaty he'd helped broker was broken 6 months later, when the government he'd trusted fed lies to the people he'd promised to protect. He'd sworn never to build bridges again. And yet here he was, 5 women in his cabin, hoof prints in the snow outside, and a choice narrowing to a single point. "I'm not a bridge anymore," Reed said quietly. Sia held his gaze. "We're not asking you to build one, just to hold the gate open long enough for us to find our own way through." Before Reed could respond, Polly stiffened. Her hand shot up silent signal. Everyone froze. From outside, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a horse's nicker. Reed was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He moved to the window and eased the curtain aside. The moon had risen higher, spilling pale light across the clearing. At the far edge near the tree line, a single rider sat motionless on a dark horse, watching. "Just one," Reed whispered. "Scout," Polly breathed. "Counting." The rider didn't move for a long moment, then turned the horse and melted back into the trees. Reed's pulse hammered. "They know you're here." "Yes," Sia said, her voice flat. "The question is what they'll do about it." Reed lowered the rifle, mind racing through options. The cabin was defensible, thick logs, narrow windows, only 2 doors. But 5 women, 1 injured against how many men? And if those men carried warrants, real or not, any violence Reed committed in defense could be twisted into a crime, unless he could prove the warrants were fake. "We need leverage," Reed said, turning from the window. "Something that proves they're not lawmen, something that stands up in court." Noli's eyes glinted. "You mean evidence?" I mean proof. Witnesses. A paper trail that can't be burned. Sia leaned forward. Sheriff Hobb in town, he's cautious. Won't move without certainty. But if we bring him something solid, then we have a chance, Reed finished. Kaya looked up from Tala's foot. And if we don't, Reed met her eyes. Then we run. There's a trail through the canyon comes out near the old mining camp. From there you can reach the passes before they cut you off. And you? Sia asked. Reed's jaw tightened. I stay. This is my land. I won't abandon it. They'll burn it. Maybe, but if I run, they win. If I stay and fight smart, we might all survive this. The room fell silent. Outside, the wind picked up howling through the eaves like a warning. Finally, Sia nodded. Then we fight smart. The first night passed in shifts. Reed took the window by the kitchen. Polly mirrored him at the door, both of them silent sentinels while the others rested. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Reed felt his eyes start to drift. He jerked awake to find Polly watching him, her expression unreadable. Sleep, she said quietly. I'll watch. Reed shook his head. I'm fine. You're swaying. Sleep. I'll wake you if anything moves. It was an offer of trust, fragile, tenuous, but real. Reed hesitated, then nodded and moved to his rocking chair. He didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled him under within minutes. He woke to the smell of coffee and the pale gray light of pre-dawn. Kaya stood at his stove, coaxing the fire back to life while Noli worked on the window latch with a screwdriver she'd produced from somewhere. Tala sat with her foot propped up, the swelling visibly reduced. Sia and Polly were outside. He could see them through the window, examining the fence line. Reed stood joints protesting and accepted the cup of coffee Kaya offered. You didn't have to. We're not guests, Kaya said simply. We're partners. Partners contribute. The words settled into Reed's chest, unexpected and warm. Outside, Sia and Polly returned, their faces grim. Sia stepped through the door, brushing snow from her shoulders. Hoof prints, she reported. At least 4 horses circled the property last night. They didn't approach, just surveyed. Counting exits, Polly added, looking for weak points. Reed set his jaw. Then we fortify. Noli, that latch secure. We'll be in 10 minutes. Good. Kaya, inventory what we have for food and medical supplies. I need to know how long we can hold if they try to wait us out. And me? Tala asked, her young voice determined despite the pain she had to be feeling. Reed considered her. You've got sharp eyes. I need someone watching that ridge. He pointed to the eastern slope visible from the back window. Anyone comes over that rise, you call out. Think you can manage? Tala's chin lifted. Yes, sir. Just Reed. No sir needed here. Something like a smile ghosted across her face. Sia crossed to the table where Reed kept his maps, old survey documents from his translation days marked with trails and camps and places most white men didn't know existed. She studied them, tracing routes with her finger. If we need to run, she said, where would you take us? Reed moved beside her, pointing. Canyon Trail here leads to the old Silverton mine, abandoned for 5 years, but the camp buildings are still standing. From there, 3 options. He traced each path. North to the rail spur, risky, lots of traffic. East through the passes, hard going but isolated. Or south to Fort Garland. Fort Garland's military, Sia said, frowning. It is. But the commander there is a man named Grayson. He was at Fort Union during the treaty talks. He's fair, more than most. Sia's eyes narrowed. You trust him? Reed hesitated. I trust him to follow protocol. If we come with evidence, he'll listen. Might not like it, but he'll listen. That's more than we usually get, Sia murmured. A knock on the door shattered the moment. Everyone froze. Reed's hand found the rifle. Polly moved to the door, silent as smoke, and peered through a crack in the shutters. One man, she whispered, badge on his coat. Reed's blood turned to ice. Crow. Can't tell. He's alone. Alone. That was either a good sign or a very bad one. Reed moved to the door, rifle ready but not raised. I'll handle this. Stay back. He opened the door a crack. The man on his porch was lean and weathered, maybe 40, with a deputy's star pinned to a coat that had seen better days. His eyes flicked past Reed to the shapes visible inside the cabin, then back. "Morning," the man said, voice affable. "Deputy Crow. Heard you might have some mules gone missing. Thought I'd check in." Mules. Reed didn't own mules. Hadn't in years. "No mules here, deputy," Reed said evenly. Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Huh, funny. Tracks led right to your gate. Big tracks. Looked like maybe 5, 6 animals." He wasn't even pretending well. Reed's grip tightened on the rifle, but he kept his voice level. "Just me and my goats, deputy. Must have been deer." "Deer don't leave tracks like that." Crow's gaze swept the cabin again, lingering on the closed door to the back room. "You mind if I take a look, just to be sure?" "I do mind," Reed said. "This is private property." Crow's jaw tightened. I'm an officer of the law." "Then you'll have a warrant." "You have a warrant, deputy." A pause. Crow's hand drifted toward his coat pocket, then stopped. "Don't need a warrant for a welfare check." "You're not checking welfare, you're fishing, and you're doing it on my land without cause." Reed stepped forward, filling the doorway. "I'm a citizen of this territory, deputy, and I know my rights. You want to search my cabin, bring paper. Until then, you're trespassing." Crow's face darkened. For a moment, Reed thought the man might push it, might call his bluff or try to force his way in, but then Crow stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. All right, no need to get hostile." His eyes went cold. "But you might want to think about who you're harboring, Mr. Callahan. Unattached Native women are a risk to settlements. That's not opinion, that's territory law." "Show me the statute," Reed said. Crow's smile turned ugly. "You'll see it soon enough. You and your guests." He turned and walked down the porch steps, mounting his horse with deliberate slowness. Before riding off, he twisted in the saddle. "Funny thing about protection," Crow called, "only works if you're on the right side of the law." Then he spurred his horse and disappeared down the slope. Reed shut the door and barred it, his hands shaking with adrenaline. When he turned, he found all 5 women staring at him. "He counted us," Sia said quietly. "Saw the blankets through the window, saw the food. Now he knows." Reed nodded. "He knows. What will he do?" Reed moved to the window, watching Crow's retreating form. "He'll get his warrant. Real or not, he'll come back with paper and men, maybe by tonight, maybe tomorrow." "Then we run," Polly said. "No," Saya countered. "We prepare. If we run now, we're just moving the problem." "Reed's right. We need proof. We need to turn this back on them." Noli crossed her arms. "And how do we get proof when they're the ones with the badges and seals?" Reed's mind churned. Then slowly an idea took shape, dangerous, maybe foolish, but the only play he could see. "We don't get proof," Reed said. "We make them give it to us." Sia frowned. "Explain." "Crow's running a game, fake warrants, forced removals, payouts downstream. But games like that leave trails. Somebody's printing those warrants. Somebody's signing them. Somebody's paying Crow and his men. If we can find that trail, we expose the whole operation." Kaya finished, her eyes widening. "But that means going into town," Polly said. "Walking into their territory." Reed nodded. "It does, and it means we need allies. People in town who can testify, who can witness what's happening." "Who would help us?" Tala asked, her voice small. Reed thought of Mrs. Lark, the storekeeper, a widow herself, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, who'd never liked the way Crow swaggered through her shop. He thought of Sheriff Hobb, cautious but fair, who'd once told Reed that the law was only as good as the evidence behind it. "I know a few people," Reed said. "It's a risk, but it's the only move we have." Sia's gaze held his for a long moment. Then she turned to the others. Vote. We run or we fight. Pali spoke first. Fight. Kaya nodded. Fight. Noli's smile was sharp. Fight. Tala's voice was steady despite her youth. Fight. Sia looked back at Reed. Then we fight. But we do it smart. We gather proof, we protect each other, and we don't give them an excuse to paint us as the criminals. Reed felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he'd thought sealed shut years ago. All right, he said. Here's how we start. They spent the morning transforming the cabin from a shelter into a stronghold. Noli reinforced the window latches and door bar. Pali and Sia mapped sightlines and escape routes, marking them on Reed's survey maps. Kaya inventoried their supplies, enough food for maybe a week if they rationed enough medical supplies for basic care. Tala took up her post at the back window, her sharp eyes scanning the ridge. Reed sat at his table and began drafting documents, affidavits, household declarations, proof of residency and employment. If Crow was going to play the legal game, Reed would play it better. He'd spent years translating treaties, parsing the language of power. He knew how to make words into armor. What are you writing? Sia asked, appearing at his shoulder. Residency papers, employment agreements, declarations that you're here by choice, working in exchange for shelter. Reed's pen scratched across the paper. If Crow comes with a warrant claiming you're unattached or vagrant, we'll have paper saying otherwise. Sia's brow furrowed. Will it hold? In a real court, maybe. With a crooked deputy, no. But it gives us legitimacy. It makes Hobb think twice before siding with Crow, and it puts Crow on notice that we're not easy prey. You're weaponizing bureaucracy. Reed's mouth twitched. I'm using the only weapon I've got that doesn't kill people. Sia was quiet for a moment, watching him write. Then, why are you doing this? Reed's pen paused. What do you mean? You could have turned us away. You could have stayed out of it. Why risk everything for 5 strangers? Reed set the pen down and met her eyes. 15 years ago, I sat in a room with men who wanted war and men who wanted peace, and I tried to find words that would bridge the gap. I failed. The treaty broke, people died, and I walked away thinking I was done, that I'd given all I had, and it wasn't enough. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But you standing at my gate last night, that wasn't about politics or treaties. That was about 5 people who needed shelter. And I realized maybe I can't change the world, but I can open a gate, and maybe that's enough. Sia's expression softened. It's more than enough. A shout from Tala shattered the moment. Smoke on the ridge. Everyone moved at once. Reed grabbed the rifle and ran to the back window. Tala pointed her finger, shaking. There on the eastern ridge, a thin column of smoke rising against the gray sky. Signal fire, Pali said, joining them. They're coordinating. Reed's stomach dropped. Coordinating meant more than one group, meant they were being surrounded. How many you think? Noli asked. Pali's eyes scanned the tree line. Hard to say, but if they're signaling, probably at least 2 groups, maybe 3. Sia crossed to the map, studying it with tactical precision. If they come from the east and west, they can pin us. North is too steep. South is the main trail. They'll block that first. We're boxed, Kaya whispered. Reed's mind raced. Boxed, but not trapped. Not yet. The canyon trail, he said, pointing to the map. It's narrow. They can't surround us there. If we move now before they close the net. They'll follow, Sia interrupted. Pick us off one by one in the open. Not if we leave them something to find. All eyes turned to Reed. Decoys, he explained. We stage the cabin like we're still here, fire-burning movement in the windows. Then we slip out through the canyon while they're watching the front. Noli's eyes lit up. I can rig something, shadows on the curtains, maybe a pot hanging over the fire that swings with the heat draft, give the illusion of people moving. How long would it buy us? Sia asked. An hour? Maybe 2 if they're cautious. Sia nodded slowly. It could work. Could, Polly echoed. Or they could rush us the moment we step outside. Reed met her gaze. Then we make sure they don't see us step outside. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd learned to survive by being smart and fast. Nolly rigged her contraption a pot suspended from the ceiling beam, with twine swinging gently over the fire to cast moving shadows. Kaya arranged bedrolls by the windows to mimic sleeping shapes. Tala, despite her foot, helped Reed gather their supplies into packs light enough to carry but sufficient for several days. Sia and Polly studied the canyon trail through Reed's spyglass, marking the best route. We go single file, Sia instructed. Polly leads, she's the best tracker, knows how to hide our trail. Then Tala, Kaya, Noli. Reed and I bring up the rear. I should lead, Reed said. No, you're armed and you know the law. If they catch us, you're our best defense. You stay back. Reed wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. He nodded. They waited until mid-afternoon when the sun angled low and shadows lengthened. Reed took one last look at his cabin, the home he'd built with his own hands, the silence he'd cultivated for 15 years. It might burn before he saw it again. Probably would, but some things mattered more than timber and nails. Ready? Sia asked. Reed shouldered his pack. Ready. Polly eased the back door open, the one facing away from the main trail hidden from the ridge by the slope of the land. She slipped out first, moving like a shadow. One by one, the others followed. Reed went last, pulling the door shut and wedging it to look closed from outside. They moved through the trees in silence, feet careful on the snow, breathing shallow. The canyon trail was a quarter-mile north, a narrow cut through the rock that most people didn't know existed. Reed had used it years ago to avoid travelers when he wanted solitude. Now it would save their lives. Or so he hoped. They were 50 yards from the cabin when Reed heard it. The distant sound of horses, multiple horses. Coming fast. Polly froze, hand raised. Everyone stopped, barely breathing. Through the trees, Reed saw them, at least 8 riders converging on his cabin from 3 directions. Crow was in the lead, a rolled paper in his hand that had to be the warrant. Behind him, men Reed didn't recognize, all armed. They were early. Too early. Move, Sia hissed. Now. They ran as fast as Tala's injured foot would allow, as quiet as fear and adrenaline permitted. The canyon opening loomed ahead, a dark slash in the rock. Polly reached it first and plunged in. The others followed. Reed brought up the rear, casting one glance back. Through the trees, he saw Crow dismount at his cabin, saw the men fan out, saw the door kicked in. Then he was in the canyon, the rock walls rising on either side, the world narrowing to shadow and stone and the sound of labored breathing. They'd made it. Barely. But behind them a shout echoed Crow's voice, furious and frustrated. They're gone. Find them. The hunt had begun. The canyon trail was treacherous in winter. Ice-slicked rock, narrow ledges, drops that would kill if you stepped wrong. But Polly navigated it like she'd been born to stone her movements, sure despite the failing light. The others followed Tala, gritting her teeth against the pain in her foot, Kaya and Noli helping her when the path grew steep. Reed's lungs burned. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and the altitude didn't help. But he kept moving, rifle slung across his back ears, straining for sounds of pursuit. They came an hour later, hoofbeats echoing through the canyon, distorted by the rock into a sound like thunder. Reed risked a glance back and saw torchlight flickering in the distance. Crow hadn't given up. They're in the canyon, Reed called forward. Sia turned her face grim. How close? Close enough. Polly pointed ahead. There's a split in the trail, half-mile up. We can take the high path, it's harder, but horses can't follow. Do it, Sia ordered. They pushed harder, muscles screaming, breath ragged. The split appeared one path continuing level wide enough for a horse, the other branching up a near vertical climb. Polly didn't hesitate. She started climbing. It was brutal. Handholds slick with ice boots, slipping packs catching on rock. But they climbed. Tala went up with Kaya pushing from below and Noli pulling from above. Reed hauled himself up last, every muscle protesting, just as torchlight flooded the canyon below. From their perch hidden in shadow, they watched Crow and his men ride past on the lower trail, oblivious. The sound of hooves faded. They'd bought themselves time, not much, but enough. "Where does the high path lead?" Sia whispered. Reed tried to remember the old survey maps. "Comes out above the mining camp. We'll have to descend on foot, but it's hidden. They won't expect it." "Then that's where we go." They moved on exhaustion, a weight on every step, but alive. Still alive. They reached the mining camp just before midnight. The buildings were skeletal, collapsed roofs, broken windows, walls sagging under years of neglect. But one structure remained mostly intact, the old bunkhouse, its door hanging loose, but its walls solid. Polly checked it first, then nodded. "Clear." They stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor, too tired to even shrug off their packs. Reed got a small fire going in the old stove, just enough for warmth, not enough to draw attention. No one spoke. Words required energy none of them had. Kaya tended to Tala's foot, rewrapping it with the last of their clean bandages. The girl had climbed on sheer will, alone. Reed suspected infection was setting in again. Despite the treatment, the wound needed rest and proper care, neither of which they could provide. Sia sat by the broken window watching the dark. Reed joined her, sinking onto the floor with a grunt. "They'll regroup," Sia said quietly. "Come at us harder next time." "I know." "We can't keep running." "I know that too." Sia turned to look at him, her face painted in shadows and firelight. "So what do we do?" Reed thought of the documents he'd drafted still folded in his pack. Thought of Mrs. Lark and Sheriff Hobb and the fragile network of people in town who might stand with them if given reason. "We stop running," Reed said. "We turn this into a fight they can't win with bullets and warrants." "How?" Reed's jaw set. "We take it public. Make enough noise that they can't bury it. Get witnesses, get proof, and we shove it in the governor's face if we have to." Sia's eyes narrowed. "That's a long shot." "It's the only shot we've got." A pause, then Sia nodded. "All right, but we need a plan, a real one." They spent the next hour mapping it out, where to go, who to talk to, how to gather evidence without getting killed. It was risky, maybe suicidal, but it was something. When they finished, Sia stood and addressed the group. "We rest tonight. Tomorrow, we split up. Polly and I will scout Crow's movements, see if we can find where he's getting those warrants. Reed will go to town, talk to Sheriff Hobb and Mrs. Lark. Kaya, you and Noli stay with Tala. She needs care, and someone needs to hold this position." "And if they find us?" Kaya asked. Sia's expression hardened. "Then we make them regret it." Reed lay awake long after the others slept, staring at the ruined ceiling and thinking about gates and bridges and the choices that defined a life. He'd spent 15 years believing he was done with the world's problems, but the world had come to his gate anyway in the form of 5 women who refused to disappear quietly. And maybe he thought that was the point. Maybe the world didn't need grand gestures or sweeping treaties. Maybe it just needed people who opened gates when others knocked. Outside, snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavy, blanketing the mining camp in white. It would cover their tracks, but it would also slow them down. Reed closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring hard choices and harder roads. But for tonight, they were alive. They were together, and the gate was still open. That would have to be enough. Dawn broke gray and cold over the mining camp, the kind of morning that made bones ache just from breathing. Reed woke to find Polly already outside studying tracks in the fresh snow with the intensity of someone reading a death warrant. He pushed himself up joints, protesting, and stepped into air so sharp it felt like inhaling knives. "They came within 100 yards last night," Polly said without looking up. "3 riders, circled twice, then headed back toward town." Reed's stomach knotted. "They know we're in this area. They're narrowing the search grid, systematic, professional." Polly straightened, her dark eyes meeting his. "Whoever's running this operation, they're not amateurs." Inside the bunkhouse, the others were stirring. Kaya had Tala's foot unwrapped again, examining it with a healer's critical eye. The swelling had worsened overnight, angry red streaks climbing toward the ankle. Reed didn't need medical training to know what that meant. "It's spreading," Kaya said quietly, her voice tight with worry. "She needs real medicine, a doctor." Tala's face was pale, her jaw clenched against pain she refused to show. "I can keep going." "You shouldn't have to," Sia said, crouching beside her. She placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, gentle, protective. "Reed, when you go to town today, can you get supplies? Proper antibiotics?" Reed nodded. "I'll try, but showing my face in town is risky. If Crow's men are there—" "Then you'll have to be smart about it," Sia interrupted. "We all will." Noli emerged from the back room where she'd been examining the building's structure. "This place won't hold if they come in force. Walls are rotted, roofs half gone. We'd be sitting ducks." "Then we need a backup position," Polly said. "Somewhere we can retreat to if this gets compromised." Reed pulled out his map, spreading it on the floor. They gathered around, studying the terrain like generals planning a campaign. His finger traced a route northwest. "There's an old shepherd's cabin about 3 miles up the ridge. Stone construction, narrow approach, defensible." "Water source?" Kaya asked. "Creek runs behind it. Doesn't freeze until January." Sia nodded slowly. "We send someone to prepare it, stock it with what we can spare. If we have to move fast, we have somewhere to go." Reed finished. The plan took shape quickly. Polly and Sia would track Crow's movements and try to locate his base of operations. Reed would slip into town through the back trails, contact Sheriff Hobb and Mrs. Lark, and gather medical supplies. Nolly would prepare the shepherd's cabin as a fallback position. Kaya would stay with Tala, keeping her stable. It meant splitting up. Reed hated that. Safety lay in numbers, but they needed information more than they needed comfort. "We meet back here by sunset," Sia said. "No exceptions. If someone doesn't show, we wait 1 hour, then assume they're compromised and move to the shepherd's cabin." "And if we're all compromised?" Tala asked, her young voice steady despite the fear underneath. Sia's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure we take some of them down with us." It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. They ate a cold breakfast jerky and the last of the hardtack, then prepared to separate. Reed checked his rifle, made sure the documents were secure in his coat, and turned to find Sia watching him. "Be careful in town," she said. "Crow will have eyes everywhere." "I've been playing careful for 15 years, Reed replied. "I know how to be invisible when I need to be." Her hand touched his arm, brief but warm. "Don't be too invisible. We need you visible enough to get answers." Reed nodded, throat tight. Then he turned and headed down the mountain, leaving the others to their own dangerous work. The trail to town was a ghost path, one of those routes only locals knew, winding through scrub pine and over rock shelves that made horses useless. Reed moved carefully, eyes scanning for sentries or scouts. Crow would have men posted. The question was, where? He found the first one 2 miles out, a lean man with a rifle sitting on a boulder with a clear view of the main road. Reed spotted him from 100 yards and adjusted his route, circling wide through a dry wash. The guard never looked his way. The second was harder to avoid. A young kid, maybe 20, positioned at the junction where the ghost path met the town road. Reed had to backtrack 1/2 mile and climb a near vertical slope to get around him. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, his lungs burned and sweat soaked his shirt despite the cold. Silver Butte looked the same as always, a collection of false front buildings huddled against the wind boardwalks, slick with ice horses tied to hitching posts. But something felt different, tense. Reed couldn't name it, but it prickled along his spine like static before a lightning strike. He slipped into town through the alley behind the livery-keeping to shadows and made his way toward Mrs. Lark's general store. The widow ran the place with an iron fist and a sharp tongue, selling everything from flour to ammunition. She'd also never suffered fools, and she'd made it clear more than once that Deputy Crow fell squarely in that category. The store was quiet when Reed entered through the back door. Mrs. Lark looked up from her ledger, eyes widening for just a moment before her expression smoothed into careful neutrality. "Mr. Callahan," she said, voice level, "haven't seen you in weeks." "Been keeping to myself," Reed replied, closing the door behind him. "So I hear." Her gaze flicked to the front window, then back to him. "You've got company looking for you. Deputy Crow was in here this morning asking if I'd seen you or any visitors." Reed's jaw tightened. "What'd you tell him?" "That I mind my own business and he should mind his." She set down her pen, leaning forward. "What kind of trouble are you in, Reed? The kind that comes from opening your door to people who need help." Mrs. Lark's expression softened slightly. "The Apache women, I heard rumors." "Not rumors, facts. They're being hunted by men with fake warrants and real guns. I'm trying to keep them alive long enough to prove Crow's running a con." The widow was quiet for a moment, her shrewd eyes assessing him. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a small ledger. "You might want to see this." Reed opened it. The pages were filled with supply orders, dates, and charges. Nothing unusual until Mrs. Lark pointed to a series of entries. "These purchases," she said, tapping the page, "all charged to Harlan Doak's account. Rope lanterns, travel rations. Normal enough, except look at the dates." Reed scanned them. His blood went cold. "These match up with the raids Sia told me about." "Do they now?" Mrs. Lark's voice was dry. "Interesting coincidence. Who's Harlan Doak? Claims to be a land agent. Handles property transfers, legal filings. Has an office above the barber shop." She paused. "Also happens to be the man who prepared the last 3 legal eviction notices I've seen in this territory." Reed's mind raced. A land agent with access to seals and legal documents. A man who could forge warrants convincing enough to fool most lawmen. He's the one making Crow's papers look legitimate. "Can't prove it," Mrs. Lark said, "but my gut says you're right." Reed closed the ledger, thoughts churning. "I need to talk to Sheriff Hobb. Can you get a message to him discreetly?" "I can, but Reed," Mrs. Lark's voice dropped, "Hobb's cautious. He won't move without ironclad proof. And even then he'll worry about his position. You're asking him to go against a deputy and a land agent. That's political." "People are dying," Reed said flatly. "That should matter more than politics." "Should, doesn't always." She sighed. "But I'll get him the message. Give me an hour." Reed nodded his thanks and turned to go, then paused. "One more thing. I need medical supplies. Antibiotics, if you have them. Bandages, carbolic solution." Mrs. Lark's eyes sharpened. "Someone's hurt. Infected wound, getting worse." She moved to the back shelves, gathering items with efficient speed. "This should help. On your account, you can settle up later." Reed accepted the bundle, gratitude tightening his throat. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Lark said grimly. "If Crow finds out I helped you, this store might be next to burn. He won't find out from me. See that he doesn't." Reed slipped out the back door and into the alley, the medical supplies hidden under his coat. The town felt even more oppressive now, like a noose tightening. He needed to find a place to wait for Hobb, somewhere out of sight, but close enough to respond quickly. The old hayloft above the livery was the obvious choice. Reed climbed the exterior ladder and settled into the shadows, watching the street through gaps in the boards. From here, he could see most of the town center, The sheriff's office, the general store, the saloon, and there above the barber shop, a second-story window with lettering that read, Harlan Doak, Legal Services. Reed studied that window, memorizing its position. If Doak was the source of the forged warrants, his office would hold the proof they needed. Seals, signatures, maybe even correspondence with whoever was funding this operation. The question was how to get inside without getting caught. Movement below caught his attention. 3 riders entering town from the East Crow and 2 of his men. They dismounted at the sheriff's office and Crow went inside while the others waited. Reed's pulse quickened. Was Hobb in there? Was Crow trying to turn the sheriff against them? 10 minutes later, Crow emerged, his face dark with frustration. He exchanged words with his men too far for Reed to hear, then they mounted and rode toward the saloon. Whatever Crow had wanted, he hadn't gotten it. Reed allowed himself a small measure of hope. Maybe Hobb was holding the line. Maybe. Another hour passed. The sun climbed higher, thin and pale through winter clouds. Reed's legs cramped from staying still, but he didn't dare move. Then finally, he saw Mrs. Lark exit her store and walk casually toward the sheriff's office. She went inside, stayed 5 minutes, then emerged and returned to her store. The signal. Reed waited another 10 minutes to be safe, then climbed down from the loft and circled around to the back of the sheriff's office. He knocked twice, paused, knocked once more, the pattern Mrs. Lark would have told Hobb to expect. The door opened. Sheriff Hobb stood there, a solid man in his 50s, with gray streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. He gestured Reed inside without a word. The office was small and cluttered, papers stacked on every surface, a wood stove radiating heat. Hobb closed the door and turned to face Reed, arms crossed. Mrs. Lark says you've got quite a story, Hobb said. It's not a story, it's happening. Reed pulled out the documents he'd drafted, the affidavits, the residency papers. Deputy Crow is running a racket. Fake warrants, forced removals, payouts to him and his men. I've got 5 Apache women sheltering on my land because they're being hunted by men pretending to be lawmen. Hobb took the papers, scanning them with a practiced eye. These are well written, but they're just declarations, Reed, not proof. I've got more than declarations. Mrs. Lark showed me her ledger supplies charged to Harlan Doak on dates that match known raids. Doak's the one forging the warrants. He's got access to SEAL's legal language. He's making Crow's operation look legitimate. Hobb's jaw worked. That's circumstantial. A good lawyer would tear it apart. Then what do you need? What would convince you? The sheriff moved to the window, looking out at the street, with an expression Reed couldn't read. I need the warrants themselves, the originals. I need to see the seals up close, verify their forgeries. I need testimony from someone Crow has targeted, and I need all of it clean, no taint of theft or coercion that a judge could dismiss. Reed's frustration boiled over. People are being terrorized, and you want a perfect case. I want a case that sticks. Hobb's voice rose, then fell. You think I like this? Crow's been a thorn in my side for months, but every time I look into his activities, the paper trail leads nowhere. If I move against him without solid proof, he'll cry persecution and I'll lose my badge. Then who protects this town? Reed forced himself to breathe. Hobb wasn't the enemy. He was just a man caught between duty and politics, trying to do right within a broken system. All right, Reed said. Then help me get that proof. Tell me where Crow keeps his warrants. Tell me how to get into Doak's office. Give me something I can work with. Hobb was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to his desk and pulled out a ring of keys. He selected one small brass horn and pressed it into Reed's hand. This opens the back door to Doak's office, Hobb said quietly. He's out of town until tomorrow, gone to the county seat on business. You've got a window, maybe 12 hours. Reed stared at the key. You're giving me permission to break in? I'm not giving you anything. If you get caught, I never saw you. If you find something, you bring it to me. Original documents, not copies. And Reed, Hobbs' eyes were hard. Make it count, because if this goes sideways, we're both finished. Reed pocketed the key. What about Crow? Where is he? At the saloon last I checked. He's been drinking since noon. Whatever you said to him yesterday has him rattled. Hobb paused. He's also been telling anyone who'll listen that you're harboring fugitives and obstructing justice, building a narrative. Let him build. I'll tear it down. Hobb walked Reed to the back door. One more thing. Those women you're protecting, if this works. If we expose Crow and Doak, the fallout will be big. Territory-wide. You ready for that kind of attention? Reed thought of Sia and Polly and Kaya and Noli and young Tala with her infected foot and her fierce determination. I'm ready for whatever keeps them safe. Hobb nodded slowly. Then good luck. You're going to need it. Reed slipped back into the alley, the key burning like a coal in his pocket. The sun was past its zenith. He had maybe 6 hours before Doak returned. 6 hours to search an office, find evidence, and get out without being seen. But first, he had to shake Crow's men. They'd be watching the main routes out of town, waiting for him to make a move. Reed circled wide, using alleys and backlots, until he reached the rear of the barber shop. The external staircase leading to Doak's office was exposed. Anyone walking past could see him. He'd have to time it perfectly. He waited until a freight wagon rumbled down the street, drawing eyes, then darted up the stairs. The key fit smoothly. The door opened with barely a whisper. Reed slipped inside and closed it behind him, his heart hammering. Doak's office was exactly what he'd expected, orderly, meticulous, designed to convey respectability. A large desk dominated the center, papers arranged in neat stacks. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A small safe sat in the corner, its door hanging open, empty or nearly so. Reed started with the desk. The top drawer held pens, ink, sealing wax. Nothing incriminating. The second drawer was locked. Reed pulled out his knife and worked the simple mechanism until it clicked open. Inside, blank warrant forms. At least 24 official-looking, with spaces for names and charges. But these weren't pre-printed government forms. These were custom-made, the seals embossed but slightly irregular. Forgeries. Excellent forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Reed's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the proof. He was reaching for the forms when he heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Reed froze. The footsteps stopped at the door. A key rattled in the lock. Doak. He'd come back early. Reed's mind raced. No time to hide. No time to run. He grabbed the warrant forms, stuffed them into his coat, and moved to the window. It overlooked the alley, a 12-foot drop to hard-packed dirt. The door opened. Reed didn't hesitate. He threw the window open and jumped. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he forced himself up and ran. Behind him, Doak's shout echoed, "Stop, thief!" Reed sprinted down the alley, burst onto the main street, and nearly collided with a woman carrying a basket. He swerved, ducked into another alley, and kept running. Footsteps pounded behind him, multiple sets. Doak had found help. The edge of town loomed ahead. Reed made for the tree line, lungs, burning legs pumping. A shot cracked out the bullet, whining past his ear. He zigzagged, making himself a harder target. Then he was in the tree's branches, whipping his face roots, trying to trip him. He didn't slow, couldn't slow. Behind him, the pursuit continued, crashing through brush, voices shouting coordinates. Reed ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, when his lungs screamed and his vision swam, he found a hollow beneath a fallen pine and crawled inside. He pressed himself into the darkness, forcing his breathing to quiet, and waited. The pursuers passed within yards of his hiding spot, their voices frustrated and angry. They searched for another 10 minutes, then gave up and headed back to town. Reed waited until silence returned, then crawled out. His shoulder throbbed where he'd landed, and his coat was torn, but the warrant forms were intact, still pressed against his chest. He'd done it. He had the proof. Now he just had to survive long enough to use it. The sun was dropping toward the peaks when Reed finally made it back to the mining camp. He approached carefully, watching for signs of ambush, but found only Polly standing guard outside the bunkhouse. She saw him and her eyes widened. "You're bleeding." Reed looked down. His shoulder had bled through his shirt, not serious but messy. "I'm fine, just a rough landing." "Landing from what?" "Doak's office window, second story." Polly's mouth twitched almost a smile. "You're crazier than I thought." Inside, the others gathered around as Reed spread the warrant forms on the floor. Sia picked one up, studying it with narrowed eyes. "These are the blanks," she said. "He fills in names as needed, makes it look official." "Look at the seals," Reed said, pointing. "They're good, but not perfect. The territorial seal has a slight irregularity. The eagle's left talon is too short. A county clerk would spot it eventually." Kaya leaned closer. "So we have proof of forgery." "We have proof Doak creates the documents," Reed corrected. "We still need to prove he's working with Crow, that there's a larger conspiracy." Sia's expression hardened. "Then we find that proof. Polly and I tracked Crow's movements today. He's got a camp about 5 miles west near the old rail spur. That's where he's staging his operations." "You saw it?" Reed asked. "From a distance. 4 men, maybe 5. Supplies stacked under tarps. And something else, a strongbox heavy enough that it took 2 men to move it." Reed's thoughts spun. "Could be where he keeps records. Payment ledgers, correspondence." "Could be," Polly agreed, "but it's guarded. We'd have to go in at night, and even then the risk is high." Noli spoke up from where she sat, sharpening her knife. "I can get into a strongbox. Give me 10 minutes and basic tools. I'll have it open." "Getting to the strongbox is the problem," Sia said, "not opening it." Reed studied the map again, tracing routes. An idea formed, dangerous, probably stupid, but possible. "What if we don't sneak in? What if we make them come to us?" "Explain," Sia said. "We create a distraction, something big enough to pull Crow and his men away from the camp. While they're chasing ghosts, Noli slips and cracks the strongbox and gets out with whatever's inside." Polly frowned. "What kind of distraction?" Reed met her eyes. "Me. I show myself. Make enough noise that they have to respond. Lead them on a chase away from the camp." "That's suicide," Kaya said flatly. "It's calculated risk. I know these mountains better than Crow does. I can lose them once they're committed to the chase." Sia shook her head. "Too dangerous." "It's all dangerous," Reed countered. But this gives us the best chance at the evidence we need. Doak's warrants prove forgery. Crow's strongbox could prove conspiracy. Together, they're enough to take to the governor." The room fell silent. Reed could see the calculation in Sia's eyes, weighing risk against reward, survival against victory. Finally, she nodded. "We do it tonight. Polly and I will position ourselves as backup if things go wrong. We extract Reed before he gets killed. Noli, you're the thief. Kaya stays with Tala." "I can help," Tala protested, her voice weak. "You can help by staying alive," Sia said gently. "We need you whole for what comes after." They spent the remaining daylight preparing. Reed cleaned and loaded his rifle, checked his ammunition, and memorized the terrain around Crow's camp. Noli gathered her tools, lockpicks, pry bars, a small vial of oil to quiet hinges. Polly and Sia planned their positions, marking sniper points and fallback routes. As dusk fell, Kaya pulled Reed aside. "You don't have to do this, you know. We could run, find somewhere safe." Reed shook his head. "There's nowhere safe. Not while men like Crow can operate with impunity. We stop this here or it follows us everywhere. And if you die trying, then at least I died doing something that mattered." Reed's voice softened. 15 years I hid from the world. Maybe it's time I stopped hiding." Kaya squeezed his arm, then returned to Tala's side. Night came fast and cold. They moved out in silence, Sia and Polly, ghosting ahead to take their positions. Noli following at a distance, Reed bringing up the rear. The forest was a maze of shadows and moonlight, every sound amplified by darkness. They reached the ridge overlooking Crow's camp just after midnight. Reed could see the layout clearly: 4 tents, arranged in a square, a fire burning in the center, 2 men on watch. The strongbox sat near the largest tent, exactly where Polly had said it would be. Reed turned to the others. "Give me 20 minutes to get in position. When you hear the shot, move fast." Sia gripped his shoulder. "Don't die, Reed. We still need you." "I'll do my best." He slipped down the slope, circling wide around the camp until he was on the opposite side from where Noli would approach. Then he found his spot, a rocky outcrop with clear sight lines and an escape route behind him. Reed raised his rifle, sighted on a tin cup sitting on a log near the fire, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the night. The cup exploded. The camp erupted in chaos. Men scrambled from tents, grabbing weapons, shouting. Crow's voice cut through the confusion. "North Ridge! Someone's on the North Ridge!" Reed fired again, this time at a lantern. Glass shattered, flames guttered out. "There, I see him!" One of Crow's men pointed directly at Reed's position. Reed didn't wait. He turned and ran, crashing through brush, deliberately making noise, leaving a trail a blind man could follow. Behind him, the pursuit began, boots pounding, voices yelling coordinates. He led them on a merry chase, using every trick he knew, doubling back, running through streams to kill his scent, using rocks to mask his prints. But he made sure they never quite lost him, a broken branch here, a footprint there, just enough to keep them committed. Mile after mile, higher into the mountains. Reed's lungs burned, his shoulder screamed where he'd injured it earlier, but he kept moving. Had to give Noli enough time. Then finally he found what he was looking for, a narrow defile between 2 cliffs, barely wide enough for 1 person. Reed squeezed through and came out the other side in a small box canyon, dead end, exactly what he needed. He climbed the cliff face, finding handholds by feel, more than sight, until he was 20 feet up. There he wedged himself into a crack and went absolutely still. Crow and his men burst into the canyon moments later, spreading out, searching. "He came in here," Crow snarled. "Find him." They searched for 15 minutes, increasingly frustrated, before Crow finally admitted defeat. "He's gone, slipped past us somehow, back to camp, double the watch." They retreated, leaving Reed alone in the darkness. He waited another hour to be absolutely sure, then climbed down and began the long walk back to the mining camp. Every muscle ached. His shoulder had started bleeding again, but he was alive, and if luck held, Noli had succeeded. Dawn was breaking when Reed finally stumbled into the bunkhouse. The others were there, tension radiating from them like heat. Noli sat at the table, a leather satchel in front of her. "Did you get it?" Reed asked. Noli's smile was fierce. "I got it." She opened the satchel. Inside, ledgers, correspondence, and a stack of receipts. Reed pulled out the first ledger and flipped it open. Names, dates, locations, payments. Received and distributed. It was all there, the entire operation documented in Crow's own hand. "This is it," Reed breathed. "This is everything." Sia picked up a piece of correspondence, a letter addressed to Crow, signed by someone named Mackenzie. "The paymaster," she said. "Whoever's funding this." Reed scanned the letter. It referenced procurement of available Native women for domestic placement and territorial expansion opportunities. Bureaucratic language hiding ugly truths. "They're not just terrorizing people," Kaya said, reading over his shoulder. "They're trafficking them." The weight of it settled over the room. This wasn't just about warrants or land grabs. This was systematic exploitation hidden behind legal language and fake authority. "We take this to Hob," Reed said. "Then to the governor if we have to. This ends now." But even as he said it, movement outside caught his attention. Polly was at the window, her body gone rigid. "Riders, at least 10, coming fast." Reed's blood turned to ice. "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter," Sia said, already moving. "We need to leave. Now." They scrambled to gather their things, the documents, the medical supplies, what little food remained. Tala tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Kaya caught her. "She can't run," Kaya said desperately. "She won't have to," Polly said. She moved to Tala and without asking permission, lifted the girl onto her back. "I'll carry her." They fled out the back as the riders surrounded the front. Reed led them up the mountain toward the shepherd's cabin Noli had prepared. Behind them, shouts echoed as Crow's men discovered the empty bunkhouse. The chase was on again, but this time they had something worth running for. The trail to the shepherd's cabin was brutal, steep, icy, treacherous in the pre-dawn light. Polly moved like a mountain goat despite Tala's weight. Her breathing steady, her focus absolute. The rest followed, pushing exhaustion beyond its limits. Halfway up, Reed heard it hoofbeats behind them closer than before. Crow had brought trackers, good ones. "They're gaining," Noli panted. Reed's mind raced. They couldn't outrun horses, couldn't fight 10 men in open terrain, but maybe they didn't have to. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow section of trail ahead, flanked by steep slopes on both sides. "We make our stand there, bottleneck them." "With what?" Sia demanded. "We've got 2 rifles and 3 pistols. We've got gravity." Reed grabbed Noli's arm. "You're good with tools. Can you rig a rock slide?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Give me 2 minutes." They reached the bottleneck. Noli scrambled up the slope, examining the rocks with practiced eyes. She selected 3 large boulders wedged precariously on the slope and began working at their bases with her pry bar. Below the riders appeared Crow in the lead, his face twisted with rage. He saw them and raised his hand, halting his men. "Callahan," Crow shouted, "you're done running. Hand over the documents and the women, and maybe I let you live." "Go to hell," Reed shouted back. Crow's laugh was ugly. "Have it your way." He spurred his horse forward. His men followed. "Now," Reed yelled. Noli threw her weight against the first boulder. It shifted, teetered, then plummeted down the slope. It struck another rock, which struck another, and suddenly half the hillside was moving, a cascade of stone and snow roaring down toward the trail. Crow saw it coming and yanked his horse aside, but 3 of his men weren't fast enough. The rockslide hit them like a fist, sweeping them off the trail and down into the ravine. Their screams cut off abruptly. The remaining riders scattered horses, panicking men shouting. In the chaos, Reed and the others ran. They reached the shepherd's cabin just as full daylight broke. It was exactly as Reed remembered: stone walls, solid door, narrow windows, perfect for defense. Noli had already stocked it with firewood and supplies. They barricaded themselves inside, gasping for breath, checking for injuries. Miraculously, everyone was intact, battered, exhausted, but alive. "They'll regroup," Polly said, peering through a window slit. "Come at us again." "Let them come," Sia said grimly. She held up Crow's ledger. "We have what we need. Now we just have to keep it and ourselves safe long enough to use it." Reed moved to the window beside Polly. In the distance, he could see Crow's remaining men regrouping, pointing up at the cabin. The deputy's face, even from this distance, was a mask of fury. "He's going to burn us out," Reed said quietly. "Then we make sure the smoke signals someone who can help." Sia replied. She was right. They had the proof. They had witnesses. Mrs. Lark, potentially Sheriff Hobb. They had documentation that could bring down not just Crow, but whoever was funding him. The question now wasn't whether they could win. It was whether they'd survive long enough to deliver the knockout blow. Outside, Crow began organizing his men. Reed could see the intent in their movements. They were preparing for a siege. Reed turned to face the others. "We've got maybe 6 hours before they try to rush us. We need to use that time to get word out. Let people know what we found." "How?" Kaya asked. "We're trapped." Reed thought hard, then turned to Polly. "You're the fastest, the most silent. If anyone can slip past them." "I'll go," Polly said immediately. "Tell me where." "Sheriff Hobb. Give him the ledger, tell him everything. If he's the man I think he is, he'll act." Polly nodded and tucked the ledger into her shirt. Sia gripped her arm. "Be careful." "Always am." They waited until clouds covered the sun, dimming the light. then opened the back window, the one facing away from Crow's position. Polly slipped out like smoke, barely disturbing the snow. Reed watched her disappear into the forest, then turned back to the others. Now we hold, whatever it takes. Tala, despite her fever, managed a weak smile. We've held this long. We have, Reed agreed, and we'll hold longer still, because the gate was still open, and on the other side lay justice, if they could just survive long enough to reach it. Polly had been gone less than an hour when the first shot rang out. The bullet punched through the shutters, splintering wood, and embedded itself in the far wall. Reed dove for cover, yanking Kaya down with him. So much for waiting, Noli muttered, crawling to a window with her pistol drawn. Sia was already at the front window, rifle steady, testing our defenses, seeing if we'll panic and run. Let them test, Reed said, checking his ammunition. 12 rounds for the rifle, maybe 20 for his pistol. Not nearly enough if this turned into a prolonged fight. Another shot, then 3 more in quick succession. The cabin's stone walls held, but the wooden shutters were taking damage. Reed peered through a gap and saw Crow's men spread out in a loose semicircle using trees for cover. Count, Sia asked. 7 that I can see. Could be more in the trees. Tala stirred from where she lay near the fire, her face flushed with fever. Let me help. I can still shoot. You can help by staying alive, Kaya said firmly, pressing a cool cloth to the girl's forehead. The infection had worsened, despite the medicine Reed brought from town. Tala needed a real doctor, a real hospital. Instead, she was trapped in a stone cabin with bullets flying. The shooting stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Crow's voice carried across the clearing. Callahan, I know you can hear me. You've got one chance. Send out the women and the papers, and I'll let you walk away. Reed didn't bother answering. Words were wasted on men like Crow. Your choice, Crow shouted. We can do this easy or hard. Noli's laugh was bitter. Easy for him means we all die quietly. Hard means we make him work for it. Then we make him work, Sia said. The attack came at noon. Not a frontal assault. Crow was smarter than that. Instead, 2 men with torches broke from the trees, sprinting toward the cabin from opposite sides. They meant to burn them out. Reed took the one on the left. His rifle cracked, and the man went down, torch flying from his hand to sputter in the snow. Sia took the one on the right center mass, clean shot. The man dropped and didn't move. Reload! Reed shouted, fingers working frantically. The rifle's breech was hot, burning his hands, but he didn't slow. Return fire came instantly, a wall of lead that hammered the shutters and chipped stone from the walls. Reed pressed himself flat, feeling the percussion of bullets passing inches from his head. When it stopped, he risked a glance outside. Crow's men had pulled back, regrouping, but Reed saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the fallen torches had caught on a pile of deadfall near the cabin's east wall. Flames were spreading, small but growing. Fire, he said. East side. Noli was already moving. She grabbed a bucket, filled it from their water barrel, and headed for the door. Wait! Reed started, but she was already outside, moving low and fast. She reached the flames and doused them with a single practiced throw. Then she was running back, bullets kicking up snow around her feet. She dove through the door, just as a round clipped the frame where her head had been. Reed slammed it shut and barred it. Clear! Noli panted, grinning despite the fear in her eyes. For now, Kaya's hands shook as she helped Noli check for wounds. That was insane. Insane is letting them burn us alive, Noli replied. Reed turned back to the window. Crow was visible now, standing behind a thick pine, directing his men with sharp gestures. The deputy's face was a study in controlled rage. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. He's getting desperate, Sia observed. That makes him dangerous. More dangerous than shooting at us, Kaya asked. Different dangerous. Desperate men make mistakes, but they also stop caring about rules or consequences. As if to prove her point, Crow suddenly stepped into full view, arms spread wide. Callahan, you listening? I've got a proposition. Reed said nothing, but he kept his rifle trained on Crow's chest. "You want proof? My warrants are real, I'll show you." Crow pulled a document from his coat and held it high. "This here's signed by Judge Aldrich himself. Legal as they come, says I can remove any unattached native women deemed a threat to territorial peace." "He's bluffing," Sia said, "trying to make us doubt ourselves." But Reed's stomach had dropped. Judge Aldrich was a territorial judge, with a reputation for harsh interpretations of law. If Crow actually had a legitimate warrant from Aldrich, "Even if it's real," Reed said slowly, "it doesn't change what Crow's doing, doesn't justify the raids, the theft, the violence." "Tell that to a judge," Nolly muttered. Crow continued shouting, "I'm giving you one last chance. Surrender now and I'll follow proper procedure. We'll have a hearing, everything legal. But if you make me come in there—" He let the threat hang. Tala's weak voice cut through the tension. "He's lying, I can hear it in his voice. My father taught me liars' voices go flat when they're selling you death." Out of the mouths of children, Reed thought. Or in this case, a 17-year-old girl who'd survived more than most adults ever would. "She's right," Sia said. "The moment we step outside, we're dead. Warrant or no warrant." Reed's mind churned. If Crow did have a legitimate warrant, it meant the corruption went higher than they'd thought, meant someone with real authority was backing this operation. That changed everything. Or did it? Reed thought of the ledger Polly carried the forged warrant forms in his coat, the correspondence naming someone called Mackenzie. Even if Crow had one real warrant, it didn't erase the mountain of evidence proving a larger conspiracy. "We hold," Reed decided. "Polly will reach Hobb. The truth will come out." "And if she doesn't make it?" Kaya asked quietly. Reed met her eyes. "Then we make sure someone else does. Someone has to survive to tell this story." The afternoon dragged on in tense silence, punctuated by occasional gunfire. Crow's men were conserving ammunition now. Taking careful shots meant more to terrorize than to kill. Reed recognized the tactic psychological warfare breaking down their will to resist. It might have worked on someone else, but these 5, if people had already survived more than Crow could imagine. As the sun began its descent, Reed noticed movement in the trees. Not Crow's men, but something else. Animals fleeing, birds taking flight in sudden bursts. Something was spooking the wildlife. "You see that?" he asked Sia. She nodded, eyes narrowed. "Something's coming. Something big." The answer arrived 10 minutes later, smoke. Not from a torch this time, but from a forest fire creeping toward them through the underbrush. Crow had circled around and set the woods ablaze upwind of the cabin. "He's insane," Kaya breathed, staring at the orange glow spreading through the trees. "He'll burn the whole mountain." "He doesn't care," Sia said grimly. "He just wants us dead, consequences be damned." Reed's mind raced through options. The cabin was stone, it wouldn't burn, but the smoke would suffocate them long before the flames arrived. And if they fled outside, Crow's men would cut them down, unless— "The cellar," Reed said suddenly. "Old shepherd who built this place dug a root cellar underneath. It's got an exit tunnel, comes out about 50 yards north beyond the tree line." Hope flared in Sia's eyes. "Can we all fit?" "It'll be tight, but yes." "Then we move. Now, before the smoke gets worse." They gathered their supplies with frantic efficiency, the documents, weapons, what little food remained. Kaya lifted Tala carefully, the girl's protests weak and ineffective. Reed pulled up the trapdoor hidden beneath a threadbare rug, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "Kaya, first with Tala," Sia ordered. "Then Noli. Reed and I cover the retreat." Kaya descended with Tala draped across her shoulders like a sack of grain. Noli followed, then turned to help receive Tala from below. That left Reed and Sia alone in the cabin, smoke now creeping under the door, the orange glow through the windows growing brighter. "You go," Reed said. "I'll hold them off, give you time to—" "Shut up," Sia interrupted. "We go together or not at all." A bullet shattered the last intact window. Smoke billowed through thick and choking. Reed grabbed Sia's arm and pulled her toward the trapdoor. "Together then, move." They descended into the cellar just as the door above gave way with a crash. Crow's voice echoed down, "They're gone, find them." Reed pulled the trapdoor shut and wedged it with the broken ladder rung. It wouldn't hold long, but it might buy them minutes. The cellar was cramped and pitch black, the air already stale. Reed felt his way forward, following the sound of the others' breathing. His hand found rough stone, the tunnel wall. "This way," he whispered. "Single file, feel your way along." They moved through absolute darkness, the tunnel barely wide enough for shoulders. Reed could hear Tala's labored breathing ahead, Kaya's whispered encouragements. Behind him, Sia's hand found his shoulder anchor and reassurance. The tunnel seemed endless. Reed's sense of direction dissolved in the blackness. But finally, blessedly, he felt cold air on his face. Fresh air. "Exit ahead," he breathed. They emerged into a shallow ravine, the forest around them painted in the hellish glow of approaching flames. The fire Crow had set was spreading faster than anticipated, driven by dry timber and mountain winds. "Which way?" Noli asked, coughing. Reed oriented himself by the stars just visible through the smoke. "North, away from the fire, away from Crow's position. There's an old mining road about a mile out. If we reach it, we can make better time." They ran, stumbled really through smoke and darkness. Tala had lost consciousness, her full weight now on Kaya's shoulders. The older woman's face was a mask of determination and exhaustion, but she didn't slow. Behind them, shouts echoed. Crow had found the tunnel. The hunt continued. Reed led them through a maze of ravines and deadfalls, using every trick he knew to obscure their trail. But with Tala unable to walk and smoke limiting visibility, they were leaving traces a child could follow. They'd covered maybe half a mile when Noli suddenly grabbed Reed's arm. "Listen." He stopped, straining his ears. There, beneath the crackle of flames and the whistle of wind, hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming fast. "They've got us bracketed," Sia said, her voice deadly calm. "Crow's men ahead, fire behind." Reed's heart hammered. They were trapped. Again, and this time there was no cabin to shelter in, no defensible position, just open forest and approaching enemies. "We split up," Reed said. "Make them choose who to chase." "No," Sia said flatly. "It's the only way. I draw them off, you get the others to safety." I said no. Sia's hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "We've lost enough. I won't lose you too." The hoofbeats grew louder. Reed could see torchlight through the trees now, maybe 30 seconds before Crow's men spotted them. Kaya lowered Tala gently to the ground and pulled out her pistol. "Then we fight. At least make it count." Reed was about to agree when he heard another sound cutting through the chaos. A voice, shouting, not Crow's voice, someone else. "Federal Marshal, stand down. All of you stand down." The hoofbeats changed direction. The torchlight swung away. And through the smoke riders appeared, but not Crow's men. These wore badges that glinted in the firelight. Real badges, federal badges. At their head rode Sheriff Hobb, his face grim but determined, and beside him, impossibly, was Polly. "Reed," Hobb called, "get your people clear. We'll handle Crow." Relief nearly buckled Reed's knees. Sia's hand found his squeezing tight. They'd made it. Somehow, impossibly, they'd made it. But there was no time for celebration. The marshals were already moving to intercept Crow's men, and the fire was still spreading. Hobb dismounted and ran to them, a medical bag in hand. "We've got a doctor waiting in town," he said, looking at Tala's unconscious form. "But we need to move. This whole ridge is going to go up." "Crow," Reed started, "is being arrested as we speak. Him and 6 of his men. Polly gave me the ledger, told me everything. I rode straight to Fort Garland, got the marshal involved." Hobbs' expression was fierce. "You were right, Reed, about all of it." Polly appeared at Sia's side, breathing hard. told you I'd make it." Sia pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. "Never doubted it." They helped Kaya lift Tala onto one of the marshal's horses. Noli mounted behind to keep the girl steady. Reed, Sia, and Polly took another horse, Hob, and a marshal, the third. As they rode down the mountain, Reed looked back once. The fire was a wall of flame now consuming everything. The shepherd's cabin was surely gone. His own cabin miles away might be threatened. Everything he'd built over 15 years reduced to ash and memory. But the people riding with him, these 5 women who'd stumbled into his life and turned it upside down, they were alive. Battered, exhausted, but alive. And that was worth more than all the timber and stone in Colorado territory. They reached town just as dawn broke. The main street was already buzzing with activity. Marshals organizing, citizens gathering news, spreading like its own kind of wildfire. Reed saw Mrs. Lark standing outside her store, arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her weathered face. The doctor, a stern woman named Dr. Morrison, took Tala immediately, barking orders for hot water and clean linens. Kaya refused to leave the girl's side, her maternal instinct overriding her own exhaustion. Hob led Reed, Sia, Polly, and Noli to his office. Inside, spread across his desk, was the evidence they'd risked everything to gather: the forged warrants, Crow's ledger, the correspondence. "We've got Crow and his men in the jail," Hob said. "But this goes deeper than I thought. The ledger mentions someone named Mackenzie. Turns out that's Clayton. Mackenzie owns half the mineral rights in this territory. He's been using Crow to clear native families off land he wants to develop." Sia's jaw tightened. "How many families?" "At least a dozen that we know of. Maybe more." Hob's expression was grave. "This isn't just about you 5. It's a systematic operation backed by money and corrupt officials." "Judge Aldrich," Reed said. "Crow claimed to have a warrant signed by him." Hob nodded grimly. "He did. I saw it. But here's the thing, Aldrich has been taking payments from Mackenzie for months. We found the proof in Mackenzie's office this morning. The marshals are moving to arrest him now." The scope of it was staggering. Not just a few bad actors, but a network of corruption, reaching from frontier deputies to territorial judges to wealthy land barons. "What happens now?" Noli asked. "Now we build a case," Hob said. "The territorial governor is already involved. There'll be a special hearing in 3 days. We'll need all of you to testify. And after," Sia's voice was careful, controlled, "after we make sure this never happens again. New oversight procedures, verification systems for warrants, protections for native families." Hob paused. "It won't fix everything, but it's a start." Reed thought of Tala in the doctor's office fighting an infection that never should have happened. Thought of all the other families who hadn't had someone to open a gate for them. A start is better than nothing. Over the next 3 days, Silver Butte transformed. The marshal's presence brought order, but also exposure. Reporters arrived from Denver and Santa Fe, drawn by the scandal. The Gazette, which had spent months printing inflammatory propaganda, was forced to run corrections as the truth emerged. Mrs. Lark became something of a hero, her ledger entries providing crucial corroborating evidence. She accepted the attention with her typical dry humor. "Just wrote down what I saw, didn't know it'd end up mattering." Dr. Morrison worked miracles with Tala. The infection was brought under control with proper antibiotics and surgical cleaning. Within 2 days, the girl was sitting up, color returning to her face. Kaya rarely left her side. Reed spent the time preparing testimony with Sia and the others. They rehearsed facts, organized documents, made sure their story was airtight. The marshals were thorough professional, but Reed could see the doubt in some of their eyes. Trained to be skeptical, they struggled to believe the depth of the corruption. Until Harlan Doak made a mistake. On the second night, Doak attempted to flee. He made it as far as the rail depot before being caught. When marshals searched his office more thoroughly, they found not just blank warrant forms, but correspondence with 6 other deputies across the territory, all running similar operations. The scandal exploded beyond Silver Butte. It was no longer a local crime, but a territorial crisis. The governor himself arrived on the third day, a stern-faced man named Wallace, who carried himself like someone used to disappointment but still willing to fight it. He called a public hearing in the town hall packed with citizens and journalists. Reed sat in the front row with Sia beside him, the other women behind them. Across the aisle, Crow and Doak sat in shackles flanked by marshals. Crow's face was a mask of barely contained fury. Doak looked broken, defeated. Governor Wallace called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "We're here to address crimes committed under false authority, crimes that have shaken the foundation of law in this territory. We will hear testimony, review evidence, and determine the path forward." He turned to Reed. "Mr. Callahan, you opened your home to the women Crow was pursuing. Tell us why." Reed stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. He thought carefully before speaking. "I opened my gate because 5 people needed help, and I had the means to provide it. Everything that came after the chase, the evidence, the conspiracy we uncovered, that happened because I chose to treat human beings like human beings, instead of problems to be solved or threats to be eliminated." He paused, then continued. "For 15 years, I told myself the world's problems weren't mine to solve, that I'd tried and failed and had nothing left to give. But those women standing at my fence showed me something: you don't have to save the world. You just have to open the gate when someone knocks. The rest follows." Sia was called next. She spoke with quiet authority, describing the raid on their camp, the forged warrants, the systematic terrorization. Her testimony was devastating in its calm precision. Polly described tracking Crow's operation, finding his camp, the evidence they'd recovered. Noli explained how she'd cracked the strongbox, what documents they'd found inside. Kaya spoke about Tala's injury, the medical neglect, the desperation that had driven them to Reed's gate. Then it was Tala's turn. The girl walked to the stand with a pronounced limp, refusing Kaya's supporting arm. She faced the room with her chin high. "Deputy Crow told us we were criminals," Tala said, her young voice clear. "Said we were threats, but the only threat was to his profit. He burned our shelters, stole our food, and when we ran, he called it justice. That's not law, that's theft wearing a badge." The room was absolutely silent. Governor Wallace reviewed the evidence methodically, the forged warrants, the ledgers, the correspondence. He examined the seals under magnification, comparing them to authentic territorial documents. The forgeries were good, but not perfect. The truth was undeniable. Finally, Wallace stood. "I've seen enough. Deputy Crow, you're hereby stripped of your authority and remanded for trial on charges of fraud, theft, assault, and abuse of office. Harlan Doak, same charges plus conspiracy and forgery. Judge Aldrich will face a separate inquiry. As for Clayton McKenzie," he nodded to a marshal who slipped out of the room. Reed felt something uncoil in his chest. It was happening. Justice, real and tangible, was happening. But Wallace wasn't finished. He turned to the crowd. "This territory has failed its most vulnerable citizens. We've allowed corruption to flourish under the guise of law and order. That ends today. I'm implementing immediate reforms. All warrants must be verified through my office. Sheriffs will answer to civilian oversight boards, and any family displaced by questionable legal action will have their cases reviewed." He paused, then looked directly at Sia. "Ms. Redbird, I understand you and your companions have lost your homes. The territory will provide compensation and assistance in finding new land if you choose to stay. You have my word, and unlike some, my word is backed by action." Sia stood slowly. "We'll stay, but not on land given to us like charity. We'll earn our place same as anyone." Wallace's mouth twitched almost a smile. "I'd expect nothing less." The hearing concluded with the formal arrest of Crow and Doak. As marshals led them away, Crow's eyes locked on Reed, burning with impotent rage. Reed met that gaze without flinching. The gate was open, and no amount of hatred could close it now. That evening, the town threw an impromptu celebration. Mrs. Lark provided food from her store, citizens contributed whatever they could spare, and the church bell rang for the first time in months, a sound of hope rather than alarm. Reed found himself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching Sia and the others be welcomed by people who days ago would have crossed the street to avoid them. Change was happening, slow, imperfect, but real. Sia appeared at his side, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She offered one to Reed. "Quite a few days," she said. Reed laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "That's one way to put it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Sia spoke, her voice quiet. "The governors offer land compensation. It's generous, but I'm not sure where we go from here." Reed looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd appeared at his gate with 4 others, desperate and hunted, who'd become a partner, a strategist, someone he trusted with his life. "You could stay," he said. "Not on government land, on mine. What's left of it anyway?" Sia's eyes widened slightly. "Reed, I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are," Reed continued. "Partners, household, family, if you want that word. The cabin's probably gone, but we can rebuild. Make it big enough for all of us. Create something that works." "A household by consent," Sia murmured, echoing words they'd spoken what felt like a lifetime ago. "Exactly." Sia was quiet, considering. Then she called to the others. Pali, Kaya, Noli, and Tala, still limping but smiling, joined them. "Reed's offering us land," Sia explained. "A place to rebuild, together. What do you think?" Pali spoke first. "I think we've earned the right to choose our own path. If this is it, I'm in." "We'd be partners?" Kaya asked. "Equal stake," Reed confirmed. "Equal say in how things run." Noli grinned. "I've always wanted to build something from the ground up, literally." Tala's smile was radiant despite her exhaustion. "A home, a real one, yes." Sia turned back to Reed. "Then yes, we'll stay, we'll build, together." They shook on it, not just Reed and Sia, but all 6 of them, hands clasped in the fading light. The next morning they rode out to survey Reed's land. The fire had indeed claimed his cabin, reducing it to charred timbers and ash. But the land itself remained the high meadow, the creek, the fence line that had marked the beginning of everything. Standing in the ruins, Reed felt not grief but possibility. The old cabin had been built for solitude, for hiding. What they'd build now would be different, open, communal, strong. "We'll need more rooms," Kaya said, already planning. "Separate spaces, shared spaces, a real kitchen." "Reinforced walls," Polly added, "just in case." Noli was examining the remaining foundation stones. "We can salvage these, build on what was here, but better." Tala pointed to the meadow. "A garden there, herbs for medicine, vegetables for food." Sia stood beside Reed, both of them looking at the land with new eyes. "It's a lot of work." "It is," Reed agreed. "Worth it, though." "Yes, it is." Over the following weeks, they worked. Not just the 6 of them, but others from town who volunteered their time. Mrs. Lark donated supplies. Sheriff Hobb helped with the heavy lifting. Even Governor Wallace stopped by during a follow-up visit, rolling up his sleeves to help raise the frame. The new structure took shape larger than the old cabin, with separate rooms for privacy and common spaces for gathering. They built a wide porch with a bench where anyone could sit and watch the sunset. They installed latches on every door that opened from the inside, a physical reminder of the principles that governed their home. And they built a gate, not to keep people out, but to welcome them in on terms of mutual respect and consent. News of their household spread. Other displaced families reached out seeking advice or shelter. Reed and Sia developed a system they'd take in people temporarily, help them get on their feet, then assist them in finding permanent situations. The ranch became a way station, a place of safety, in a territory still learning to be just. On a cold morning in early spring, a letter arrived from Fort Garland. Reed opened it to find a request from Commander Grayson. Could their household serve as an official relay point for families in need? The military would provide supplies and coordination. Reed and the others would provide the human touch. He showed the letter to Sia. "What do you think?" She smiled. "I think we've been doing this already. Might as well make it official." They accepted. The ranch at Silver Butte became a recognized safe haven. Its name entered into territorial records. People came, sometimes one or two, sometimes whole families. They stayed as long as they needed, contributed what they could, and left stronger than they'd arrived. The conspiracy's aftermath continued to unfold. Crow and Doak were convicted and sentenced to hard labor. Judge Aldrich was removed from office and faced his own prosecution. Clayton Mackenzie fled the territory but was eventually caught in California. The network of corrupt deputies was systematically dismantled. But more important than punishment was prevention. The reforms Governor Wallace implemented took root. Verification procedures protected against future forgeries. Oversight boards kept sheriffs accountable. And displaced families finally had recourse when their rights were violated. It wasn't perfect. Injustice still occurred. But the machinery of corruption had been broken, its parts scattered and neutralized. One evening, 6 months after that first desperate knock on Reed's gate, they all gathered on the new porch. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple. A pot of stew bubbled on the stove inside. Somewhere in the distance, a letter was making its way to another family in need, carrying the promise of shelter and safety. Tala, fully healed now, sat on the porch rail, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Kaya and Noli argued good-naturedly about the garden layout. Polly cleaned her rifle with practiced efficiency, ever the sentry. Sia sat beside Reed on the bench, their shoulders touching comfortably. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. Opening that gate. Reed thought about it. Thought about the quiet life he'd lost. The peace of solitude, the simplicity of answering to no one. Then he thought about the home they'd built, the lives they'd saved, the system they'd changed. Thought about the people who now had hope because he'd chosen to act instead of hide. "Not for a second," he said. Sia's hand found his. "Good, because there are 2 more families coming next week. Letter arrived this morning." Reed laughed, the sound rich and free. "Then we'd better get more firewood." As darkness fell, they moved inside, all 6 of them. This household built on consent and mutual care. The doors latched from the inside. The fire burned warm, and the gate stood open, ready for whoever might need it next. Because that's what gates were for. Not to keep people out, but to welcome them in, to offer shelter, to provide a place where safety wasn't a privilege but a right. Reed Callahan had spent 15 years alone, convinced he had nothing left to give. 5 Apache widows had proven him wrong, and in doing so, they'd given him something far more valuable than solitude. They'd given him purpose, family, home, and that was worth more than all the silence in the world. The 2 families arrived on a Tuesday, exhausted and weary, their possessions loaded on a single wagon with a broken axle. Reed saw them from the porch and felt his stomach tighten. One woman carried an infant that couldn't have been more than a few months old, while 3 children huddled close to their mother, their eyes too old for their young faces. "More refugees from Mackenzie's operations?" Sia asked, already moving toward the wagon. Reed nodded grimly. "Looks like it." They helped the families settle, offering food and warm beds without questions. The mother's sisters, it turned out, spoke in hushed tones about men who'd come with papers claiming their land was needed for rail expansion. When they'd resisted, their homes had been burned. No deputies this time, just hired thugs who knew the law wouldn't touch them. "Same pattern, different players," Polly observed that evening as they gathered in the kitchen. "Mackenzie's in custody, but the machine he built keeps running." "Because we only cut off one head," Nolly said, sharpening a knife with methodical strokes. "The body's still moving." Reed stared at the legal documents. The families had brought eviction notices signed by someone named Collins, a name he didn't recognize. The seals looked legitimate this time, but the justification was paper thin. "We need to take this to Hob." Already planning to, Sia said. But Reed, we can't save everyone, not if this keeps spreading. The weight of it pressed down on Reed's shoulders. They'd won one battle, exposed one conspiracy. But the territory was vast, the opportunities for exploitation endless. How many more families would appear at their gate before the system truly changed? That night, as Reed lay awake, listening to the sounds of the overcrowded household children whimpering in their sleep, mothers murmuring comfort, he realized the victory they'd achieved was only the beginning. The real fight was just starting. Morning brought unexpected visitors, 3 riders wearing federal badges, led by a marshal Reed didn't recognize. The man dismounted with the careful movements of someone expecting trouble. "Reed Callahan," the marshal asked. "That's right. Marshal Dawson, Territorial Office. I need to speak with you and Ms. Redbird. Official business." Sia appeared in the doorway, her expression guarded. "What kind of business?" Dawson pulled out a document. "The governor's called a special session in Denver, wants testimony about ongoing displacement operations. We've received reports from 6 other counties, similar patterns to what you exposed here. He needs witnesses who can speak to the whole scope." Reed exchanged glances with Sia. "When 3 days, I'm authorized to provide escort and protection." Dawson's eyes swept the property. "I understand you're sheltering displaced families. They'll need to come too. Their testimony could be crucial." "Some of them have infants," Kaya said, joining them on the porch. "They can't travel that distance." "Then we bring the hearing to them," Dawson replied. "Governor's already considered that. He'll come here if necessary. But Callahan and Redbird, he wants you in Denver. Says you're the ones who broke this open." Sia's jaw tightened. "We leave our people to go to Denver. What's to stop another raid while we're gone? I'll be leaving 2 deputies here, armed and authorized." Dawson's expression softened slightly. "I know trust is hard to come by, but the governor's serious about shutting this down territory-wide. Your testimony could do that." Reed thought of the families sleeping in his barn, the children who'd seen their homes burn, the mothers who'd walked miles with infants on their backs. If there was a chance to stop this from happening to others— "We'll go," Reed said, "but the protection stays here until we return. Non-negotiable." Dawson nodded. "Done." They left before dawn the next morning, riding hard with Dawson and his marshals. The journey to Denver normally took 4 days, but they pushed the horses, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Sia rode beside Reed, her silence heavy with thought. "You're worried," Reed said. "I'm always worried, comes with the territory." She glanced at him. "But yes, this feels bigger than Silver Butte, bigger than even Mackenzie's operation." "You think it goes higher?" "I think men with power protect men with power. We exposed the visible corruption, but what if there's more underneath?" Reed had been thinking the same thing. The documents they'd found, the correspondence with Mackenzie, they'd never identified all the players, just the ones careless enough to leave traces. Denver sprawled before them on the 3rd day, a city of smokestacks and grand buildings that made Silver Butte look like a frontier outpost. The Territorial Capitol building dominated the skyline, its dome gleaming in the afternoon sun. Governor Wallace met them personally, his expression grave. "Thank you for coming. I know it's a risk." "Risk is relative," Sia said dryly. "What do you need from us?" Wallace led them to a private office where documents covered every surface. "We've been investigating since your case broke. What we've found is extensive. Mackenzie wasn't working alone. He had partners, land speculators, railroad investors, mining interests. They created a system identify valuable land held by native families or small homesteaders, manufacture legal justification to remove them, then acquire the land at fraction of its worth." Reed felt sick. How many families? Conservative estimate over 200 in the past 5 years. And that's just what we can document. The numbers staggered Reed. 200 families. Thousands of people displaced their lives, destroyed their land stolen, and they'd only saved a handful. The hearing tomorrow will be public, Wallace continued. I'm calling every implicated official to account. But I need you to testify about how the system worked on the ground. The human cost. Numbers on paper don't move people the way stories do. We'll testify, Reed said. But what about protection for the families we left behind, and all the others still out there? I'm declaring a moratorium on all native land transfers pending review. Any family claiming wrongful displacement can petition for reinstatement. And I'm establishing a territorial land commission with enforcement power. Sia leaned forward. Who serves on this commission? Wallace's slight smile acknowledged the skepticism. I was hoping you would. You and Callahan both. You've proven you can't be bought or intimidated. That's what we need. Reed's mind reeled. A commission position meant staying involved, meant making this fight his life's work, instead of a temporary stand. It meant no more quiet solitude, no more distance from the world's problems. But when he looked at Sia, he saw the same calculation in her eyes, the same understanding that some doors once opened couldn't be closed. We'll consider it, Sia said carefully, after the hearing. That evening they stayed in a hotel, the first real beds they'd slept in for weeks. But Reed couldn't rest. He stood at the window watching Denver's gas lamps flicker to life and thought about the 200 families, the children who'd lost homes, the mothers who'd walked through snow carrying everything they owned. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Sia entered without waiting for permission, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, offering him a glass. Too much in my head. They stood together at the window, drinking in silence. Finally, Sia spoke. If we take these commission positions, everything changes. No more quiet ranch, no more choosing who we help. It becomes official, public. I know. And the target on our backs gets bigger. Men like Mackenzie have friends, partners who won't appreciate being exposed. Reed turned to face her. Are you saying we shouldn't do it? I'm saying we need to go in with our eyes open. This isn't just about opening gates anymore. This is about tearing down walls. And walls have people standing behind them, people with money and power who'll fight to keep those walls standing. Reed thought of Tala's infected foot, of Polly carrying her through the mountains, of Kaya's determination, and Noli's fierce intelligence. Thought of the families in his barn and the 200 families he'd never met, but who deserved the same chance. Then we tear them down anyway, Reed said. Carefully, strategically, but we tear them down. Sia's smile was sharp and approving. Good, because I already told Wallace we'd do it. Reed laughed, despite himself. You decided for both of us. I decided for me, but I know you, Reed Callahan. You opened your gate once. You won't close it now. She was right. Damn her, she was right. The hearing convened at 9 the next morning in the Capitol's main chamber. The gallery was packed journalists, politicians, citizens who'd heard rumors and wanted truth. Reed and Sia sat in the front row, flanked by marshals, while Wallace presided from the bench. The first witnesses were officials from Mackenzie's network brought in shackles to testify about the conspiracy. They painted a picture of systematic exploitation, false surveys, claiming land was unused, forged transfer documents, intimidation tactics ranging from legal harassment to outright violence. Then Wallace called Reed. The walk to the witness stand felt endless. Every eye in the chamber tracked him. Reed placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then faced the assembled crowd. Wallace began gently. Mr. Callahan, please tell us how you became involved in this matter. Reed spoke carefully, choosing words that would paint a clear picture without melodrama. He described the night Sia and the others appeared at his gate, the desperation in their faces, the rope burns and infected wounds. He explained about Crow's fake warrants, the raids, the systematic terrorization. And when you discovered the scope of the conspiracy, Wallace prompted, I realized we weren't dealing with one corrupt deputy. We were dealing with a machine designed to steal land and destroy lives while hiding behind legal authority. Reed's voice strengthened. These weren't isolated crimes, they were policy, and they only worked because good people looked away. A murmur ran through the gallery. Wallace raised a hand for silence. What would you say to those who argue that territorial expansion requires difficult choices? Wallace asked. Reed met his eyes. I'd say expansion built on theft and violence isn't expansion, it's conquest. And it makes us no better than the empires we claim to have escaped. The chamber erupted. Half the gallery applauded, the other half shouted objections. Wallace's gavel cracked like gunfire, demanding order. When Sia took the stand, she was even more direct. She named names, cited dates, described in clinical detail how the system worked from the victim's perspective. Her testimony was devastating because it was unembellished, just facts delivered with quiet fury. They told us we had no rights, Sia said, that the law didn't protect us because we weren't citizens in any way that mattered, and for a long time they were right. The law was a weapon used against us, not a shield. And now, Wallace asked, now we're making it a shield, but only because someone finally listened when we knocked on his gate. The testimony continued through the afternoon. Other victims came forward, homesteaders who'd lost land to suspicious foreclosures, native families forcibly relocated, even a few white settlers who'd refused to cooperate and paid the price. Each story added weight to the mountain of evidence. But it was the final witness who changed everything. Marshal Dawson escorted a well-dressed man to the stand, someone Reed didn't recognize. The man's hands shook as he swore the oath. "State your name for the record," Wallace said. "Thomas Garrett. I was Chief Land Surveyor for the Territorial Development Office." A chill ran down Reed's spine. The Territorial Development Office reported directly to the governor's cabinet. "Mr. Garrett," Wallace said quietly, "please tell us what you know." Garrett's voice cracked. "I was ordered to falsify surveys, to mark occupied land as vacant so it could be claimed for development. The orders came from above, from Secretary Morrison's office." The chamber went silent. Secretary Morrison was the territory's second highest official, answerable only to the governor. "Are you certain?" Wallace demanded. "I have the orders in writing, dates, signatures, specific instructions." Garrett pulled documents from his coat with trembling hands. "I kept copies because I knew it was wrong, but I was told it was for the territory's greater good that expansion required sacrifice." Wallace took the documents, his face ashen. Reed watched the governor scan the pages, saw the moment when comprehension hit. This wasn't just about Mackenzie or Crow or even Judge Aldrich. This went to the heart of territorial government. "Recess," Wallace said hoarsely. 1 hour. The chamber exploded into chaos. Journalists rushed for the doors, citizens shouted questions, and marshals struggled to maintain order. Reed and Sia were hustled into a side room by Dawson, who looked as shaken as everyone else. "This is bad," Dawson said. "If Morrison's involved, half the territorial government could be compromised." Sia's expression was grim. "Which means they'll fight back, hard." "We need to protect those documents," Reed said. "And Garrett. He's a dead man if the wrong people get to him." Dawson nodded. "Already on it. Wallace is moving him to federal custody tonight." But even as he spoke, Reed heard a commotion in the main chamber, shouting, a gunshot. They burst through the door to find pandemonium. Someone had attacked Garrett, trying to seize the documents. Marshals had intervened, but in the chaos, papers were scattered, people were injured, and Garrett himself lay on the floor, blood spreading from a wound in his side. "Doctor!" Wallace roared. "Get a doctor!" Reed and Sia rushed to Garrett's side. The man's eyes were wide with fear and pain. "The documents," he gasped. "They can't destroy them." "They won't," Sia promised, pressing her hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. "You stay with us. You hear me? Stay with us." Medical help arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. The hearing was suspended, the chamber cleared, and suddenly the fight that had seemed won was thrown into chaos. In the aftermath, Wallace assembled his core team in his private office, Reed, Sia Dawson, and a few trusted advisors. The governor's face was carved from stone. "Secretary Morrison has fled," Wallace said, without preamble, "along with 3 other officials we've identified as part of the conspiracy. They're in the wind, likely heading for Mexico or California." "Garrett," Reed asked, "alive but barely. The doctor says the next few hours are critical." Wallace slammed his fist on the desk. "They tried to kill a witness in my own Capitol building. This is beyond corruption. This is open warfare." "So what do we do?" Sia asked. Wallace met her eyes. "We finish it. We hunt down every conspirator, we secure every document, and we make sure the truth comes out, no matter who it implicates." "Even if it destroys the territorial government?" one of the advisors asked nervously. "Especially if it destroys the territorial government," Wallace said. "Better to rebuild from honest ruins than to govern from a foundation of lies." Reed felt the weight of the decision settling over the room. This wasn't just about justice for displaced families anymore. This was about the integrity of an entire government, the future of a territory trying to become a state. "We'll need help," Reed said. "People we can trust absolutely. And we'll need to move fast before they can destroy evidence or silence more witnesses." "I'm deputizing you both," Wallace said, pulling out badges. "Full territorial authority. You'll work directly with Dawson to track down Morrison and the others. Whatever you need, you have it." Sia took her badge, studying it. "You're sure about this? We're not lawmen." "No," Wallace agreed. "You're better. You're people who've proven they'll do what's right even when it's hard. That's what we need now." They left Denver that night riding with a team of marshals toward the border. Word had come that Morrison was heading for a railhead in Pueblo, planning to catch a train to Mexico. If they could intercept him there, they'd have a chance to capture him and whatever evidence he carried. The ride was brutal, 40 miles through mountain passes in the dark. Reed's body ached from days of hard travel, but he pushed through. Beside him, Sia rode with single-minded focus, her hand never far from her weapon. They reached Pueblo just before dawn, only to find the railhead already active. Morrison's private car sat on a siding steam building in the locomotive. They were preparing to leave. "No time for subtlety," Dawson said. "We go in hard and fast. Reed, Sia, you secure Morrison. My men will handle his guards." They moved in coordinated silence surrounding the train car. At Dawson's signal, they struck. The guards were professional but outnumbered. Within minutes, they were disarmed and restrained. Reed kicked open the door to Morrison's private car to find the secretary stuffing documents into a fireplace. "Stop!" Reed shouted, rifle raised. Morrison turned his face a mask of desperation and rage. "You have no authority here, Callahan." "Wrong." Reed pulled out the badge Wallace had given him. "Territorial deputy acting under direct orders from the governor. Step away from the fireplace." For a moment, Reed thought Morrison might resist. The man's hand drifted toward a desk drawer, but Sia was faster, her pistol aimed at Morrison's head. "Don't," she said quietly. "I've shot better men for worse reasons." Morrison's shoulders sagged. Defeated, he stepped away from the fireplace. Sia moved immediately to salvage what documents remained, pulling half-burned papers from the flames. Reed kept his rifle trained on Morrison, while Dawson entered to place the secretary in shackles. "You're making a mistake," Morrison said as they led him away. "I was protecting the territory's interests. Everything I did was for expansion, for progress." "You were lining your pockets while people lost their homes," Reed said flatly. "That's not progress. That's theft." They transported Morrison back to Denver in chains. The documents Sia had saved from the fire proved to be the final peace correspondence between Morrison and land speculators' payment records, orders to fabricate legal justification for seizures. Everything they needed to prove the conspiracy reached the highest levels of government. The trial that followed was swift and public. Morrison, Mackenzie, Judge Aldrich, and 14 other officials were convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and abuse of office. The sentences were harsh. Some faced decades in prison, others were stripped of citizenship and exile. But more important than punishment was reform. Wallace dismantled the Territorial Development Office and replaced it with the Land Commission he'd promised. Reed and Sia accepted positions on that commission, along with representatives from native communities, homesteader associations, and civic groups. The work was painstaking. They reviewed hundreds of land transfers, identifying fraudulent claims and working to restore property to rightful owners. Not every family could be made whole. Some land had been sold to legitimate buyers. Some families had scattered too far to find, but they saved what they could. Through it all, Reed learned something about justice. It wasn't a single moment, a dramatic confrontation where right triumphed over wrong. It was a process, grinding and slow, requiring constant vigilance and endless patience. The household at Silver Butte became the commission's informal headquarters. Polly managed security, using her tactical skills to protect witnesses and evidence. Kaya organized family reunifications, matching displaced people with recovered property. Noli handled logistics, ensuring supplies reached where they were needed. Even Tala, fully recovered, took on the role of messenger, carrying communications between the commission and far-flung communities. 6 months after Morrison's trial, Reed stood on his rebuilt porch watching a family move back onto land they'd lost 2 years earlier. The father shook Reed's hand with tears in his eyes, unable to find words for his gratitude. "It's not me you should thank," Reed said. "It's everyone who refused to look away." That evening, the household gathered for dinner, a raucous affair with 12 people crowded around a table built for 8. 2 of the families they'd sheltered had moved on to their own land, but new arrivals had taken their place. The cycle continued. After the meal, Reed and Sia walked to the gate, the same gate where this had all begun. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in impossible colors. "Think we're making a difference?" Sia asked. Reed thought about the families restored to their land, the officials behind bars, the reforms that would protect future generations. Thought about how one choice, opening a gate on a winter night, had cascaded into territory-wide change. "I think we're trying," he said, "and trying matters." Sia's hand found his. "Wallace wants us in Denver next month. Something about expanding the commission's authority to cover water rights disputes." Reed groaned. "More politics. More prejudice," Sia corrected. "Or the attempt at it anyway." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching night claim the sky. Behind them, light and laughter spilled from the house their house built, on principles of consent and mutual care. Ahead of them, the territory stretched vast and complex, still healing from years of exploitation. The fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But they'd proven something important, that ordinary people standing together could challenge systems of power and win. Not easily, not cleanly, but win nonetheless. And that was worth every hard mile, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. Because gates existed for a reason: to be opened, to welcome those in need, to create spaces where justice wasn't an aspiration, but a practice. Reed Callahan had opened his gate once, and he'd keep it open come what may. That was the promise. That was the work. And he was finally ready for it. The letter from Fort Garland arrived on a morning when spring was just beginning to soften the mountain's hard edges. Reed recognized Commander Grayson's handwriting, immediately precise, military, each word chosen with care. He opened it at the breakfast table while Sia poured coffee and Kaya fussed over a pot of oatmeal that threatened to burn. "What does he want?" Sia asked, reading Reed's expression. Reed scanned the letter once, then again to make sure he'd understood correctly. "There are 11 more families, Apache, Navajo, some Ute, all displaced by operations we haven't uncovered yet. They need shelter while the commission investigates their cases." Nolly looked up from sharpening her knife. 11 families, Reed, were already at capacity. The barn's full. We've got people sleeping in the workshop. I know. Reed set the letter down, his mind already calculating. But Grayson says they've got nowhere else to go. The other way stations are overwhelmed, and winter damaged most of the temporary shelters. Polly appeared in the doorway, her face serious. How many people total? 37, mostly women and children, some elderly. The kitchen fell silent. Tala, now 18 and stronger than she'd been in months, spoke quietly. We can't turn them away. You know we can't. I'm not suggesting we do, Reed said. I'm just trying to figure out how. Sia moved to the window, looking out at the land they'd rebuilt. We expand again, build another bunkhouse, maybe 2, convert the old stable into proper living quarters. That takes time, Kaya said, and money we don't have. Then we get creative. Reed stood the plan forming as he spoke. I'll wire Wallace, ask for emergency commission funds. Sia, you reach out to the families in town who've offered help. Polly, we need a security assessment. 37 more people means more visibility, more risk. And me? Tala asked. Reed smiled at her. You're the best rider we have. I need you to go to Fort Garland, assess their condition, and help organize the transport. Think you can handle it? Tala's smile was fierce, already packing. Within the hour they were in motion. Tala rode out with a letter for Commander Grayson. Sia headed to town to mobilize their network of supporters. Reed drafted his request to Wallace, knowing the governor would understand, but that bureaucracy would slow the response. What arrived instead 3 days later shocked them all. A convoy of wagons appeared on the horizon, not from Fort Garland, but from Denver. At their head rode Governor Wallace himself, accompanied by a dozen workers and enough building supplies to construct a small village. Reed met him at the gate, stunned. Governor, we weren't expecting. I know. Wallace dismounted with a weary smile. But I've been thinking about what you said at the hearing, about expansion built on theft. It stuck with me. He gestured to the wagons. This is the territory's apology. Not enough, but a start. The workers set to immediately their efficiency, suggesting military training. Within hours, they'd surveyed the land and begun laying foundations. Wallace pulled Reed and Sia aside, his expression grave. There's something else. The commission uncovered another operation bigger than Mackenzie's, a syndicate operating out of Cheyenne using shell companies to disguise land acquisitions. We're talking about operations in 4 territories, coordinated financing political connections that reach Washington. Reed felt the familiar weight settling on his shoulders. How big? Estimates suggest over 1,000 families affected, maybe more. Wallace paused. I need you to testify before a congressional committee next month, both of you. This has gone federal. Sia's jaw tightened. We leave for weeks, and who protects the people here? I'm leaving a permanent marshal detachment, 6 men fully authorized. Wallace's eyes were earnest. I know you're tired. God knows you've done more than anyone should have to, but you're the ones who broke this open. Congress needs to hear from you. Before Reed could respond, a shout came from the workers. They'd found something, bones buried in a shallow grave on the far edge of Reed's property. Human bones. The marshal Wallace had brought began excavating immediately, uncovering remains of at least 3 people. From their clothing and jewelry, they appeared to be native, likely buried years ago. This was a massacre site, the marshal said grimly. Probably 10-15 years back, before you owned this land, Callahan. Reed stared at the bones, feeling sick. His sanctuary, the land he'd thought clean and empty, held secrets he'd never imagined. How many other crimes were buried in Colorado's soil, hidden beneath snow and silence? Sia knelt beside the grave, her hand hovering over the remains without touching. We give them proper burial, honor them the right way. We will, Wallace promised, and we investigate, find out who they were, what happened here, add it to the list of crimes that need answering for. The discovery cast a shadow over the building project, but it also hardened everyone's resolve. This wasn't just about helping the living anymore, It was about remembering the dead bearing witness to atrocities that someone had tried to erase. The families from Fort Garland arrived 5 days later, traveling with Tala and a military escort. Reed watched them come up the road, exhausted, wary, but still moving forward. Among them was an elderly woman who walked with a cane, her back straight despite obvious pain. She approached Reed directly, her eyes sharp and assessing. "You're the translator." Reed nodded, surprised. "I was, long time ago. I remember. Fort Union, 1868. You spoke for my husband during the treaty talks. He said you were the only white man there who understood that listening is more important than speaking." The memory surfaced a chief whose name Reed had long forgotten, whose voice had carried the weight of his people's hopes. A man who died when that treaty was broken. "I'm sorry," Reed said quietly. "Sorry we failed you then." The woman's smile was sad but not bitter. "You didn't fail, the system did, but you're trying to fix it now. That counts for something." Her name was Aida, and she became the heart of the expanded household. While younger people worked on construction or helped with daily tasks, Aida organized the children, teaching them languages and traditions that might otherwise be lost. She had a gift for drawing out stories, for preserving memory in the face of erasure. One evening, Reed found her sitting with the remains they'd discovered, speaking softly in a language he didn't recognize. When she finished, she turned to him. "They were from my sister's clan, killed for refusing to leave their hunting grounds. The men who did it buried them here, thinking no one would find out." Her eyes held his. But secrets have a way of surfacing. Truth is patient. The federal hearing in Washington was scheduled for early June. Reed and Sia traveled by train, leaving Polly in charge of the household. The journey took 4 days, carrying them through landscapes that shifted from mountain to prairie to the humid corridors of power in the nation's capital. Congress assembled in a chamber that made Denver's capital look modest. Senators and representatives from every state and territory filled the seats while spectators packed the gallery. Reed felt small in that vast space, acutely aware that the decisions made here would shape lives across half a continent. The committee chairman, a stern-faced senator from Massachusetts, called the hearing to order. "We're here to investigate allegations of systematic land fraud in the Western Territories. Mr. Callahan, Ms. Redbird, please approach." They told their story again, the 5th time by Reed's count. But he made it fresh, made it real. He spoke about the night 5 women appeared at his gate, about the conspiracy they'd uncovered about the bodies buried on his land. Sia described the machinery of exploitation, how legal language became a weapon against the powerless. But it was the questions that revealed the real battle. A senator from Nevada leaned forward, his tone skeptical. "Mr. Callahan, you expect us to believe that territorial officials, federal judges, and private citizens conspired to defraud hundreds of families? That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Reed replied. "It's documented fact. We have ledgers, correspondence, witness testimony. 17 officials have been convicted already." "Convicted in territorial courts," the senator countered. "Not exactly impartial venues." Reed felt his temper rise, but forced it down. "Senator, are you suggesting the convictions were false? Because the evidence is available for review. Every document, every witness statement." Another senator, this one from Illinois, interjected. "The real question is motive. Why would respectable businessmen risk everything for what amounts to relatively small parcels of land?" Sia's laugh was harsh. "Small parcels, Senator, we're talking about millions of acres, land with mineral deposits, water access, rail routes, and they didn't see it as risk. They saw it as standard practice. Because who would believe a few displaced families over men with money and position until someone did?" Reed added. "Until the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore." The questioning went on for hours, some senators genuinely seeking truth, others clearly trying to discredit the testimony. By the end, Reed was exhausted, his voice hoarse from speaking. But then the committee chairman dropped his bombshell. This committee has received additional evidence, he said, holding up a folder. Documents provided by a whistleblower from the Department of the Interior. They suggest the conspiracy reaches beyond territorial officials to federal employees tasked with native affairs. The chamber erupted. Senators shouted questions, spectators pressed forward, and reporters rushed for the doors. The chairman's gavel cracked repeatedly, demanding order. Reed and Sia exchanged glances. If the Interior Department was involved, it meant corruption at the highest levels of federal government. It meant their fight was far from over. The hearing was adjourned pending review of the new evidence. Reed and Sia were sequestered in a federal building under armed guard for their protection. They were told, though it felt like imprisonment. 3 days later, they were summoned to a private meeting. The committee chairman was there, along with 2 men Reed didn't recognize, older, well-dressed, carrying themselves with the authority of those accustomed to being obeyed. Mr. Callahan, Miss Redbird, the chairman said, allow me to introduce Assistant Secretary Crawford from Interior and Director Hayes from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Reed's stomach dropped. These were the men who oversaw federal native policy, who controlled resources and determined fates if they were corrupt. Crawford spoke first. His voice measured. We've reviewed the evidence. The allegations are credible and deeply troubling. 3 employees in my department have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Only 3? Sia asked sharply. 3, we can prove beyond doubt at this moment, Crawford replied. But the investigation continues. Director Hayes and I are committed to rooting out corruption wherever it exists. With respect, sir, Reed said. We've heard similar promises before from territorial officials who turned out to be part of the problem. Hayes leaned forward, his expression grave. I understand your skepticism. God knows it's earned. But consider this, we're offering you positions. Federal appointments to a new oversight committee dedicated to investigating land fraud and protecting native rights. Real power to make real change. Reed's mind reeled. Federal positions, the chance to extend their work beyond Colorado to affect policy across all territories, but also potentially a way to silence them, to absorb them into bureaucracy where their voices could be controlled. We need time to consider, Sia said carefully. Of course, Crawford said, but be aware the offers are time-sensitive. We need people we can trust in these positions immediately before the corruption spreads further. That night, alone in their guarded room, Reed and Sia argued. It's a trap, Sia insisted. They bring us in, make us part of the system, and suddenly we can't criticize that system anymore. Or it's a genuine chance to make change, Reed countered. To take what we've learned and apply it nationally. You really believe that? Reed was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. But I know this, we can't fight every battle ourselves. We need allies in places of power. Maybe we become those allies and lose our independence in the process. Maybe, or maybe we gain leverage, access, the ability to protect people on a scale we never could as private citizens. Sia moved to the window, staring out at Washington's gaslit streets. What about the household, the people depending on us? Polly can manage, you know she can, and it's not forever, just long enough to build something that lasts beyond us. Nothing lasts beyond us, Reed. Systems decay, people forget. In 10 years, 20, this will all be buried again, unless someone keeps digging. She was right, and Reed knew it. But he also knew that some fights required compromise, required working within systems, even as you tried to change them. We accept, Reed said finally, but on our terms. We maintain our independence, we keep the household running, and we walk away the moment they try to muzzle us. Sia turned from the window, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. On our terms, the moment they compromise us, we're gone. They accepted the positions the next morning. The announcement made headlines across the country. Frontier justice advocates join federal reform effort. Some praised it as progressive leadership. Others decried it as government overreach. Reed didn't care about the politics. He cared about the work. The new committee, officially the Federal Commission on Land Rights and Native Affairs, began operations in July. Reed and Sia split their time between Washington and Colorado, using the railroad to bridge the distance. It was exhausting, demanding, often frustrating work, but slowly, grudgingly, they saw progress. New regulations required third-party verification of all land transfers involving native property. Whistleblower protections were established. A fund was created to compensate families who'd lost land to fraud. The machinery of justice was slow, but it was moving. Back at Silver Butte, the household continued to evolve. The new bunkhouses were completed, housing the families from Fort Garland plus others who arrived monthly. Aida's teaching had grown into a formal school, preserving languages and traditions while preparing children for a changing world. Polly had taken on the role Reed once held, guardian of the gate decider of who entered and on what terms. She was stricter than Reed, had been more cautious, but no less committed to the principle: the gate stayed open for those who truly needed it. One autumn evening, Reed returned from Washington to find the household gathered around a bonfire. Someone had brought a fiddle, another a drum, and impromptu music filled the air. Children danced, adults talked and laughed, and for a moment, the weight of all they'd fought for lifted. Sia found him standing at the edge of the firelight, watching. "You're thinking too much again." Reed smiled. "Just remembering. 15 years I lived alone in these mountains, convinced I had nothing left to give. Seems like a different life." It was a different life. You were a different person. Was I? Or was this always here, just waiting for someone to knock on the gate? Sia considered that. Maybe both. Maybe we're all just waiting for permission to be who we're meant to be. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration. Tala was teaching some of the younger children a dance, her movements strong and sure, no trace of the injured, frightened girl who'd arrived at Reed's gate. Kaya and Noli were deep in conversation with some of the newer arrivals, already planning expansions to the medical and workshop facilities. And Aida sat in a place of honor near the fire, surrounded by children listening to a story Reed couldn't hear but could feel the importance of. "We did this," Sia said quietly. "We opened a gate, and this is what came through." Reed thought about all the gates that had opened since that first one, literal and figurative doors that led to testimony, to investigation, to reform. Thought about the people whose lives had been restored, the system that was slowly, painfully learning to do better. "It's not finished," he said. "It never will be. Justice isn't a destination, it's a direction." A week later, a telegram arrived from Fort Garland. Another family needed shelter, a widow with 2 children displaced by a mining operation that claimed eminent domain without proper compensation. The familiar request, the familiar need. Reed showed the telegram to Polly. "Can we take them?" She surveyed the household, mentally calculating space and resources. "It'll be tight, but yes. We always find room. Send word we'll receive them next week." Polly nodded and headed to the telegraph office. Reed watched her go, this woman who'd been a frightened refugee and was now a leader in her own right. The cycle continued, but it was a good cycle, one of healing, of growth, of gates opening instead of closing. That evening, Reed and Sia took their now customary walk to the gate. Spring was approaching again, nearly 2 full years since 5 Apache widows had appeared in the snow. The land had transformed. What had been a solitary cabin was now a small community, buildings clustered together, smoke rising from multiple chimneys, the sound of life everywhere. "Wallace sent word," Sia said. "The congressional reforms passed. Full implementation by summer." "That's good news." "It is. But he also said there are rumors new operations starting up in Wyoming and Montana. Different tactics, same exploitation." Reed sighed. "It never really ends, does it?" "No, but that's not defeat. That's just the nature of the work." Sia's hand found his. We keep the gate open. We keep building. We keep fighting. That's all we can do. And it's enough. Sia was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Ask me again in another 2 years. They stood together as night claimed the sky, the household lights glowing warm behind them. Reed thought about the question Sia had deflected, whether their work was enough. He thought about the 1,000 small victories and the countless battles still ahead. Maybe enough was the wrong measure. Maybe what mattered was consistency, showing up day after day, keeping the gate open when it would be easier to close it. Maybe justice wasn't about grand gestures or final victories, but about the simple, stubborn refusal to look away. The Federal Commission's work continued for 3 more years. Reed and Sia traveled thousands of miles, testified in dozens of hearings, helped restore land to hundreds of families. The reforms they helped establish became models for other territories, then states. The machinery of justice once wielded against the powerless was slowly being repurposed as protection. It wasn't perfect. Corruption found new disguises. Exploitation discovered new methods. But the landscape had shifted. Victims had recourse. Whistleblowers had protection, and the automatic assumption that power made right had been challenged in ways that echoed forward. Eventually, Reed and Sia stepped back from the Federal Commission. They'd built something that could function without them, and the household at Silver Butte needed their full attention. The work there had grown beyond sheltering refugees. They'd established a formal school, a medical clinic, workshops that taught practical skills, and a legal aid office that helped families navigate the still complex process of land restoration. On Reed's 60th birthday, the household threw a celebration. Nearly 100 people came, families. They'd helped officials, they'd worked with friends, they'd made along the way. Governor Wallace arrived from Denver, older and grayer, but still carrying himself with purpose. Even a few congressmen made the journey, those who'd supported the reforms and wanted to see their impact firsthand. As the sun set, Aida called for silence. She stood with effort, her age showing, but her presence commanding. Many years ago, she said, my husband spoke at Fort Union about the power of words to build bridges. But there's something more powerful than words, actions. Reed Callahan, you opened a gate when it would have been easier to keep it closed. That single action created ripples that are still spreading. She gestured to the crowd. Look around. Every person here represents a choice to act. Instead of ignore, to build. Instead of destroy, to open. Instead of close. This is Reed's legacy, not the reforms or the commission or the headlines. This, people choosing to be better. The applause was thunderous. Reed felt his throat tighten, overcome by the moment. Sia squeezed his hand, understanding without words. Later, when the celebration had quieted and most guests had departed, Reed and Sia sat on the porch with their core household, Pali, Kaya, Noli, Tala, and Ayita. The family that had formed in fire and fear, now tempered by time and work, into something unbreakable. What happens next? Tala asked. She was 23 now, engaged to a young lawyer who shared her passion for justice. The work continues. Pali said simply, it always does. But maybe not all of it falls on us, Kaya added. We've trained others, built systems. Our job now is to support, not carry the whole load. Reed looked at each of them, these 5 women who'd transformed his life, who'd shown him that isolation was just fear wearing a different name. Whatever happens, we keep the gate open. That's the one thing that doesn't change. Agreed, Sia said. The others nodded. The final surprise came 6 months later. A letter arrived from Washington bearing the president's seal. Inside was a formal commendation for Reed and Sia's service to justice and native rights. But more significantly, it included an invitation to the White House for a ceremony honoring citizens who'd advanced civil rights. They almost didn't go. The household was busy, another family needed help, and Washington felt very far from the mountains they called home. But Aida convinced them. Some moments are symbolic, she said, and symbols matter. They tell future generations that this work, these struggles were important. Go, stand in that White House, represent all of us who couldn't. So they went one last time to a ceremony filled with dignitaries and speeches. The president himself, a man Reed had only seen in newspapers, shook their hands and spoke words about courage and justice that probably meant more to him than to Reed. But as they stood in that grand room surrounded by power and ceremony, Reed thought about the truth of their journey. It hadn't started in halls of power or ended with presidential commendations. It had started with 5 women at a gate and a man who chose to open it. Everything else was just echo and consequence. The household at Silver Butte continued long after Reed and Sia stepped fully back from public work. They spent their final decades there watching new generations take up the cause, watching the systems they'd helped build, mature, and evolve. Polly eventually married a rancher from the valley, but she kept her room at the household splitting time between 2 homes. Kaya became a renowned healer, her medical clinic serving 3 counties. Noli opened a workshop that employed dozens, teaching skills that kept families fed. Tala and her lawyer husband established the territory's first native rights advocacy organization. And Aida, she lived to be 97, teaching until her last coherent day, ensuring that memory outlasted those who would erase it. Reed died in his sleep at 71, Sia beside him. His last words whispered to her in the pre-dawn darkness were simple: "Keep the gate open. Always," she promised. Sia lived another 8 years, long enough to see Colorado achieve statehood, long enough to see the reforms they'd fought for written into state constitution, long enough to know that the work would continue, that the gate would stay open, that the choice they'd made on that winter night had permanently altered the landscape of justice in the American West. On the morning she died, surrounded by family, biological, and chosen, Sia asked to be taken to the gate one last time. They carried her there in her chair, and she sat looking out at the mountains she'd come to love. "Tell them," she said to Tala, who knelt beside her. "Tell everyone who comes after. The gate stays open. No matter what, no matter who. If someone needs shelter, if someone needs justice, if someone just needs to be seen as human, the gate opens. That's the promise. That's the work." "We'll tell them," Tala promised, tears streaming down her face. "We'll never stop telling them." Sia smiled, reached out to touch the gate's latch, the same one Reed had touched that first night, and closed her eyes for the last time. They buried her beside Reed on the hill, overlooking the household beneath a stone that bore simple words: "She opened gates." The household continues still more than a century later. The original buildings have been preserved as historical sites, but new structures surround them: a museum, an educational center, a working ranch that still takes in families who need shelter. The gate still stands, maintained lovingly, never locked. And carved into that gate, added years after Sia's death, but carrying the weight of the original promise, are words that echo across generations. This gate opens for all who need it. That is our covenant. That is our work. That is how we honor those who came before and those who will come after. Reed Callahan had been a translator once, someone who built bridges with words. But his greatest translation wasn't linguistic, it was moral. He translated compassion into action principle, into practice, and the simple human act of opening a gate into a movement that changed the course of justice in America. 5 Apache widows had knocked on that gate seeking 3 days of shelter. What they found was a man ready to be transformed, and what they created together was a legacy that would shelter thousands. The gate still stands, still opens, still welcomes, because some promises once made echo forever. Some actions once taken create ripples that never stop spreading. And some choices, like opening a gate on a winter night, change not just individual lives, but the very shape of the world. That was Reed Callahan's gift. Not that he was extraordinary, but that he understood the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness consistently applied. The rest was just details. Important details, certainly the reforms, the trials, the systemic changes. But at the heart of it all was something beautifully simple, a gate, a knock, and a choice to answer. Everything else followed from that. And in the end, isn't that how all great change happens? Not with trumpets and declarations, but with quiet decisions made in crucial moments, with gates opening instead of closing, with welcome instead of fear. Reed and Sia understood this. The 5 women who knocked understood this. And now, generations later, thousands more understand it too. The gate at Silver Butte still stands a physical reminder of a spiritual truth. Justice begins when we choose to see each other's humanity, when we open doors instead of building walls, when we say yes to the stranger at our gate, especially when it would be easier to say no. That's the story. That's the legacy. That's the lesson carved not just in stone, but in the living practice of every person who's passed through that gate and been transformed by it. The gate opens, always has, always will. That's the promise Reed Callahan made one winter night, and it's a promise that will never be broken.